Welcome back, guys. We're in a new studio this week. Excited to be over here at Red One Studios, and we are really excited about the guest that we have today. Orion Taraban, you guys have seen him online as PsycHacks. He's got over 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. He is a licensed psychologist in the state of California. He got his PhD in the Bay Area, and he's the author of a great book that just came out about 10 days called The Value of Others. I'm reading it right now. It's kind of the convergence of behavioral psychology or behavioral economics and evolutionary psychology. It's absolutely fantastic. Orion, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's great to be here.
Beautiful, man. There's a ton of stuff I want to talk to you about.
Fantastic.
I do a lot of research. And by the way, Tristan Darshan, he's a senior over at Harvard. He's also a co-host today. He wanted to come on this because he's studying psychology. So this is going to be exciting because he has a bunch of questions as well. There were a bunch of different things that you talked about. I do a lot of study. I try to study as much as I can for each podcast that I do. And sometimes like afterwards, I kind of like not lose interest, but I can't keep up with all hundreds of my guests. In your stuff, I'm subscribed. Your stuff is terrific. Every single one of the things you talk about is terrific. I don't know, you know who Aaron Clary is. He's an economist who goes over like the dating scene. I feel like what you're doing is like a more, you use psychology in a bit more accurate, succinct way of like describing some of these ideas. And one of them that I loved was the concept of women price the value of sex here and men price the value of sex here. And because there's such a divergence, we're ending up in a situation with the lowest number of marriages. People are hooking up less. When the price valuation is so different, people aren't even negotiating. And
Sure.
I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think that is a naturally occurring phenomenon as a consequence of our over-reliance on online dating. So we've seen that there's been an enormous shift in how people are meeting each other, at least in America. 10 years ago, 20% of couples admitted that they met each other online.
Yeah.
In the most recent year in which statistics were available, I think 2022, it's now up to over 50%. So I think that's a 250% increase in a decade, which is incredible. So most Americans are now meeting each other online.
Yeah.
Now, across that same decade, we've seen a radical decline in the number of marriages, the number of relationships being transacted, and even hooking up, which is somewhat paradoxical because on some level, it's never been easier in the history of the world to potentially find a sex or relationship partner. You just open the magic rectangle in your pocket, and there are ostensibly hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of single and not so single people in your area who are looking to transact for those things. And yet fewer and fewer relationships are being transacted. So why might that be? And one of the theories that I do talk about in the book is that this is a natural consequence of perception and, let's say, supply and demand, or at least perceived supply and demand. So what happens when a man is swiping on a dating app? Well, it's just him in his own private living room. He has no intrasexual competition. He doesn't really know where he ranks relative to other men that these women might be swiping and matching. So why not believe that he's a pretty decent option for these women? Right. And it's just him and a seemingly infinite supply of women. Like it never runs out if you're in a major metropolitan area. And so from his perception, it's a buyer's market. Yeah. There's one person, him, who's looking to transact and a seemingly endless supply of women. So given the context of why men and women tend to enter into the sexual marketplace to begin with, which is that men attempt fundamentally to exchange resources for sexual opportunity, and women attempt to exchange their sexual opportunity for resources, given the fact that it's a buyer's market, he thinks, well, somewhere out there, there's going to be a woman who's willing to transact for sex at a lower price point. And he's right. It's just like the globalist arguments that happened, a couple decades ago under the World Trade Agreement. Yes. There's someone in the world who will do your job for less money. Yeah. That's true.
And I think the evolutionary mismatch from evolutionary psychology, like Dunbar's number, about 150 people that would live in an ancestral tribe. And you would probably have somewhere between like 6 and 8 females as a young boy that you could possibly mate with that are part of that same tribe. And now it's the point where we have like unlimited choice, and possibly the human brain was not designed to have that level of choice.
Absolutely not. Now, having too few options is a problem of itself. Like, I don't want to go back to the days where there was just 2 ladies to choose from and they could both potentially be stinky. But we need to get together because we need to survive the winter, because life is harsh and we're basically living at subsistence. Yeah. That said, we are not psychologically yet equipped to deal with at least perceived infinite optionality. Yeah. Like, as is usually the case, it takes a long time for our humanity to catch up with our technological developments. In any case, from the man's perspective, he thinks that there is a buyer's market. And so because he's trying to exchange resources for sex, he thinks that somewhere out there, there's a woman who would accept less for the same opportunity. He's right. And so that drives down the price of the proposed transaction, which leads to the fuckboy phenomenon. Because somewhere out there, there's a woman who's ready to go. And he's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the same token, you just flip that around for the woman. Like the woman is there, she's in her living room. She doesn't see any other women. She doesn't know how she matches up with her intersexual competition. So she thinks that she's probably a pretty decent option herself. And it's just her and a seemingly infinite number of men who seem very eager to transact for her sexual opportunity. So from her perspective, it's a seller's market. She's dealing with one, she's the only vendor in town, and there's seemingly endless customers who are trying to get through her door. So that jacks up the price of the proposed transaction. And so that leads to women basically coming out of the gate asking for a committed relationship, which is kind of nuts. I mean, I can understand why women might be offended when men just directly proposition them for sex, because those men are basically trying to get something of value for not very much at all. But the value of male commitment is so much higher than the value of an individual sexual encounter in today's sexual marketplace that it's almost ludicrous that you can come right out of the gate and expect to get that.
Yeah. Whereas a man might be asking for sex up front very quickly, and she's like, you did nothing to earn it. A woman is saying very early on, I want a relationship. And the man is thinking, well, you did nothing to earn it. But from her standpoint, she's like, well, I'm the woman. Have you not seen all these right swipes that I get on these dating apps? This is what my apparent value is to the other side.
Sure.
You had a question?
Yeah. I want to, dig into your mind about, like each person's perceived values, because men will swipe right oftentimes a lot more than women will. Women who are like in the sexual marketplace, who are not necessarily at the top, will get significantly a lot more attention, meaning that they would value themselves more. So how do you reconcile that with the statistics where it's like, I believe it's 10% of men get 80% of the right swipes, and 20% of men, 10% get 60%, 20% get 80%.
Yeah, so the top 10% of men on dating apps get 63% of the right swipes. The top 20% get 83% of the right swipes. The top 40% of men get 96% of the right swipes, which is madness when you consider it. And women find 80% of men on these dating apps to be unattractive, and only 4.5% so attractive that they would actually pursue. So if you're in that top 4.5% of men, dating apps are fantastic for you. Like you said, hookup culture, fuckboy phenomenon. It's only those men that are part of that hookup culture. Even Mac and Murphy was talking about the bottom third of men do not get to really participate in the short-term hookup culture for whatever reason. They may be too short or too broke. Scott Galloway had a great point. It's like women are not interested in mating with broke men. Like that seems to be the number one facilitator. And I also was reading one story where they were talking about the likelihood of going a year without sex. And one of the highest precipitators was living at home, being underemployed or unemployed was one of the highest precipitators of women not choosing you at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were saying?
No. So my question is, how do you reconcile that in your research? Because if, 50% of people are getting on relationships through apps, but only a certain number of men are actually getting matches, how does that that almost seems like contradictory in a way.
Help me understand that a little bit better. What's the contradiction?
So if only less than 40% of men are actually getting matches at all, do you feel that basically there are a lot of men who are actually higher value, but their perceived value of themselves are lower, and then women have a higher perceived value than they actually are, and that's where that dichotomy is coming from?
Okay, so that can certainly be the case. So I think that you have to approach dating apps like a tool, and you have to learn how to use the tool in order to operate it successfully. If you don't know how to use a dating app, it's going to feel absolutely infuriating.
Yes.
It's going to feel hopeless that you'll ever meet anyone for anything. This can be both from a man's perspective and a woman's perspective. And for a man to use a dating app successfully, he has to use it as a massive action tool, because there's no way around that. Given those numbers, the only way that you can improve the likelihood of ever entering into any kind of sexual relationship as a man on an app is to throw out so many different lines that in the aggregate, you eventually cross some sort of probability threshold, and somebody is willing to give you a chance.
Absolutely.
Right.
The other thing that I really loved, you actually said this when you were on whatever podcast, was the concept of like sexual marketplace value, which a lot of people find this like term offensive. The concept that someone can have a marketplace value, but there has to be some value. If you were to stratify 1 million people based on their dating apps or their physical appearance, there is a point where someone is in the mean and someone is like out at 1 or 2 standard deviations. What you said I thought was brilliant, because it's the best way I've heard it described, because this is one of the most controversial topics that people have. It's who is willing to get into a committed relationship with you. So your definition, and like women don't like this concept because they'll believe my market value is based on how many master's degrees that I've earned and what my income is, as opposed to understanding, no, as a man, my value is based on the woman that is willing to commit to me. And as a woman, your sexual market value is based on the man that is willing to commit to you. Those men that you right swipe or you left swipe on dating apps, often these women will think, well, because I left swipe on them, I could get any of these men to commit to me, not recognizing these men are here for short-term sexual access. In fact, that's what the majority of these dating apps are for, is short-term sexual access. And so they'll think, because this man was willing to give me short-term sexual access, therefore I could easily get him to commit, and therefore my sexual market value is here, whatever I define it to be, as opposed to coming to recognition is like, you're single for a reason, and that is because the men that you chose were not willing to commit to you. And so could you go a little bit more into that? I thought that definition was perfect.
Sure. I mean, you did a pretty good job already. So yeah, sexual marketplace value is a really touchy topic, but everybody uses it, at least with respect to their own decisions in the sexual marketplace. When your friends tell you that you could do better, that's them using sexual marketplace value as a quantity, if not as a discrete value. But it's still the understanding that some people are better options for you than others, and that your optionality is related to the perceived value of your customers, the opposite sex, basically. Right? So I do talk about the fact that it can be really touchy, because it's very hard to say like what a high value man or a woman is, because no matter what you say, there's going to be somebody out there, and let's even assume that they're being genuine and honest here, who says, money isn't actually important to me. I mean, I'm sure you hear that all the time from women, right? And I don't think that that's true in all cases that that's being said. It's certainly socially unacceptable to be too mercenary about that from a woman's perspective.
Sure.
But let's assume that there are some women out there who said, height don't matter to me. Money doesn't matter to me. Looks don't matter to me. And they might be right. But that's the difference between individual preference and, let's say, preferences at the population level. Okay. So I do talk about number of different sexual marketplace values in the book. There's normalized, perceived, and transacted. And so what you're talking about is transacted sexual marketplace value. On some level, nothing has a value until the point of sale.
Yes.
And no one really knows how much something is worth until someone is willing to put their money on the table and say, it's worth this much. And if you accept that money, you agree that it's worth that much. If you accept
you
less,
reinforce that value.
Yeah.
You reify the value. You bring it into existence. It didn't exist before you accepted that value. If you took less, it would have been worth less.
Yeah.
If you held out and eventually received more, it would be worth more, but it's always worth exactly what is being transacted. Okay. Now, given the fact that men are the gatekeepers of commitment and women are the gatekeepers of sex, the transacted sexual marketplace value is gendered between men and women, in the sense that you have to measure a person's point of sale against what is more difficult for them to receive. Since women are the gatekeepers of sex, it's certainly no big thing for them to open their gate at will. It's much harder for them to get the other side to open their gate. And so that's how we have to measure, let's say, their success rate in the marketplace, and vice versa for men. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
100%. And on top of that, can you actually go into, you did a video recently called the $50,000 beer and why the most attractive women aren't on dating apps. We've been theorizing this and talking about this for a while, but you're the one who actually broke down the math of why that is. So can you dive into that a little more?
Sure. The fact of the matter is that there's opportunity costs associated with dating. It's very easy to know why 9s and 10s aren't on dating apps.
Yes.
Because they're on untraditional dating apps like Instagram and other forms of social media. Like, if you're a beautiful woman, you certainly don't need to market yourself explicitly for a sexual relationship.
Right.
You just need to exist and put pictures of yourself out there for men to see. And men will notice, because men are constantly scanning their environment for the most beautiful, attractive women. just like women are doing. They're just generally a little bit more surreptitious about it. I'm convinced they kind of have eyes in the back of their head.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you can catch a woman checking you out. If you do, it's because she wanted you to catch her.
Right.
She dropped the handkerchief.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So most women who are that attractive are getting hundreds, if not thousands, of direct messages every day, every week. And these messages are, hey, come to Dubai with me for the weekend. We'd love to have you on the super yacht. Or, hey, I just got center court tickets to Wimbledon. I was wondering if you're doing anything on Thursday. Happy to buy you first class ticket out here.
Mm-hmm.
So these are extravagant opportunities.
Yeah.
The likelihood that she is going to forego any of those opportunities on a given Saturday to have a beer with a random dude in the local dive bar is absurd. From the guy's perspective, if he bought that woman a drink, it would cost him $10. But from the woman's perspective, it would cost her a trip to Dubai.
Cost her Wimbledon, yeah.
Right. So that's a $50,000 beer from her perspective, and no fucking beer is worth $50,000. So that doesn't necessarily mean that women are crass, materialistic money grabbers, because that is a really difficult opportunity to resist over a long period of time. If the roles were reversed and somehow women were coming out of the weeds offering me these fabulous experiences, I probably would do it as well.
Anyone who would consider that to be gold digging, just consider if you were paid twice as much to do the same job you're doing now, would you deny that? Of course, like the opportunity is there. And because the efficiency or inefficiency, if you will, that's created through Instagram, it's like now every guy who has that offer now can find every girl that is that attractive or more girls that are that attractive. Whereas before social media, they weren't able to do that.
It's a virtuous cycle, of course, because the best way to get an attractive woman is to have attractive women.
Yes. So I haven't heard you just specifically discuss the concept of mate choice copying, sexy sons hypothesis, or pre-selection, but you have mentioned that.
It's in the book.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, just in a paragraph or two.
Okay.
Maybe haven't gotten to that chapter yet.
Okay, cool. Awesome. I'm about a quarter of the way through the book. It's absolutely terrific, guys. Again, if you guys are a fan, do you watch Gad Saad ever?
I'm sorry. I watch very little social media.
So Gad Saad is an evolutionary psychologist who studies behavioral economics. That's at Concordia University. And it's actually a kind of similar, but this goes way more in depth of the stuff that you're talking about. One of the things I also loved was when you said originally that women's demands become more expensive over time. At first I was like, they become more expensive, but aren't they the same? But then I started realizing, I think what you mean is that the buying power that women have decrease over time as they get older, and so because of that, their purchase becomes more expensive. Does that make sense?
Well, we can understand this in the context of the attempted mutiny. Have you gotten there yet in the book?
No, I haven't got that part.
So I do a chapter on maintaining relationships.
Okay.
And in particular, I discussed the 3 most common crises that pretty much every couple has to expect and negotiate over the course of their relationship. And the second crisis is the attempted mutiny, which is at some point in the middle of the ocean, the passenger goes up to the helm and says, hey, I know that we discussed that we were going here before, but turns out I've changed my mind. I'd really like to go someplace else instead. And so this is a crisis of power because we're starting to understand who actually drives the ship. Is it the captain who drives the ship, or is it the passenger who drives the ship through the captain? Do you understand? And at this point, it can become very expensive because this passenger may have insinuated herself into the ecology of that ship very considerably. It now might be very inconvenient, if not expensive, to extricate her and to replace her. And so she's waiting to make the attempted mutiny attempt after that insinuation has occurred. So it becomes more expensive to keep a woman over time, typically, especially if you're a successful high-value man. And you understand
more expensive for the man.
Of course.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Well, the other one was about the woman's house being on fire. And like how her transaction becomes more expensive over time as well.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So I did an episode on the standoff between men and women, where women are basically looking at men and saying, do better, guys. Come on. Like, you can't expect us to be enthusiastic about this kind of relationship based on how you are. And men are increasingly looking at women and say, come on, look at what you're doing. This is what I'm overpaying for a used good here.
Yeah.
So it's like both sides kind of want the other side to blink first. And that's fine if the two parties were kind of equal power level and could persist at an equal power level over time. The fact of the matter is that men's and women's sexual marketplace value tends to change at differential rates as a function of time. And it generally deteriorates faster for women because their sexual marketplace value, for better or for worse, is so heavily focused on their physical attractiveness and their fertility and reproductive cues. And this is a liability for men. Like, men are so monomaniacally focused on these things. It's bad for them, and they can forego really good partners and commitment relationship opportunities because they are just so focused on the physical. But that's not going to change anytime soon, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact of the matter is that as the standoff goes on, the woman's value tends to decrease, but the offer still remains the same. Namely, a 38-year-old woman who wants to get married is basically asking for the same thing as a 22-year-old woman who wants to get married, a lifetime of protection and provision. And the fact of the matter is, a 38-year-old woman is not a very attractive reproductive opportunity if that's what you're looking for. Like, she only has a few good childbearing years left.
At 40, I believe she has 5% of her eggs left on average. I believe that's what the number is.
That's probably right.
Yeah.
And those eggs might come at a higher risk associated with pregnancy. As you know, they might require expensive IVF treatments to be successful.
So she's like essentially demanding the same price while the value has
Of course. And
dropped.
if you want to have a family, you'll have fewer children.
Well, her purchasing power has dropped.
Right.
Her ability to like when...
But she might not feel that way, to your point, because she
right.
might say, what are you talking about? I'm a successful woman.
Mm-hmm.
I pay my own way. I have a master's degree. I own my own house. Okay. And that's fine. And that's all well and good. But it's the cat who decides what milk is good. It's like, it's not for the woman to decide what men should value. And it's not for men to decide what women should value, right? That's like a business saying that their customers should buy their product because they think it's a good product.
Right.
That's bad business.
Right. That's why you call it the value of others, because your value is determined by the market, not yourself.
Right. Your value is determined by whoever is willing to transact for it.
No matter how unfair it seems to you, that is essentially, because what you said before, I was just listening to you in the book talking about subjective. It is a bunch of subjective values that come together to price the S&P 500 exactly where it is. Inputs of buyers and sellers together, and you come to that one number. That seems so transactional. When you were saying what you were saying before about the value, a sexual market value of a woman being determined by who would be willing to commit to her, that takes soulmate out of it. It takes chemistry out of it. It takes all these other things out of it where women are like talking about energy, and it makes this thing a very cold, calculated economic transaction. And in the end, that it ends up being what it is. And I think that's why a lot of people find it maybe offensive.
It's offensive because you're saying the quiet part loud.
Yeah.
Like I say this in the first chapter, there are laws and rules about the game of mating and dating. Laws are more biologically determined. They tend to be universal across time and place. Rules are very much culturally bound and are subject to faddishness and trends and things like that. And one of the rules is the transaction should be as invisible as possible. And this is even true with respect to professional relationships. Like, you go to a fine restaurant. How do they give you the check? They give you the check in like a covered leather envelope.
Yeah.
They thank you so much for, is there anything else you can do? You put the card in there. You kind of look away. If you're giving them a tip, they're not supposed to look at the tip that they're receiving. That's gauche, right? Mm-hmm. The whole basis of the restaurant, the reason why I came in was to exchange my money for food.
Yes.
The whole reason the restaurant exists is because they have food that they want to exchange for money.
You said the quiet part loud.
But it's not pleasant to make that too explicit, even though it has to be that way, or else that restaurant couldn't stay in business.
In sales.
It's so funny.
Same thing in sales.
Same thing in sales is something that I've been doing recently, telling my guy friends, because they're like, I keep getting used by women for my money, and I have always told them, like, go find the waitress when your date isn't even seeing it, pay for it when no one can see the transaction, and then later on when you get up, be like, oh, it was handled. Like, maybe the restaurant took care of it. I always try to not let people even see the transaction that happens. Same thing if someone is paying for a dance floor table, go find the waitress, pay for it where nobody can see you doing it, so people don't change their perception of you, especially if it's like a $20,000 table.
I also say that in a good relationship, the transaction is invisible.
Yeah.
And the analogy I gave was my relationship with my power company. Mm-hmm. Like, most of the time, I don't think about my relationship with my power company because the only time I think about it is when something is fucked up. Yeah. And it's like the power gets cut off. It's not being delivered when it needs to be delivered. Yeah. Or there's some problem with my automatic payment and then I hear from them and they have a problem with me, right? So it's like, as long as I'm effortlessly and visibly getting my needs met and they're effortlessly and visibly getting their needs met, I love my power company.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's interesting because I use the word love, which in my mind is how most people use that word. It's not actually how I define the word love in this book.
Sure.
Mhm.
But most of that like positive feeling, I love this, is based on being gratified, which means that you get more of what you want and less of what you don't.
Yeah.
And when people get that, they love those things. They love those restaurants. They love those teams. They love those experiences, and they love those people. The ones who give them more of what they want and less of what they don't.
Beautiful.
Yeah, actually, to segue into that, you recently did a 3-part series on like why successful men actually defer to using escorts. So I think that's a really good segue. As well.
Before we go into that, I want to say this because this is really important. You did a 3-part series, like you said, talk about successful men using escorts. And the first thing you say is, I don't use escorts and I'm not condoning you using escorts. But what I loved, and this is the way I saw it, was almost like escorts as being a constant measured against dating and how dating becomes more expensive for men at time, and then comparing that to what escorting is. I thought that was brilliant. And then you also talked about the $50,000 beer, which I thought was a great way to bring this whole concept back to economics.
And also to say that the same thing kind of happens from the other perspective. It's like I did actually get contacted by a few male escorts afterwards, which was interesting through my private channels, but there's clearly a much stronger market for female escorts than for males. And so it can feel like that's just like a male problem. It's icky, but the females don't really have to do this because they have social media and they're receiving these kinds of offers anyway. But it is interesting. And they call it the oldest profession for a reason. It's been around forever, and the value and the prevalence of prostitution and escorts changes as a function of time and market value and societal pressures, et cetera, et cetera.
If you ever read the book, it's Scorecasting, I believe, or Freakonomics. I forgot. It's one of the two.
Freakonomics.
It's Freakonomics.
Yeah.
They go over the buying power of a prostitute back in the 1920s to right now. And they show that like back then she's making the equivalent of $400,000 a year, because back then free sex was much harder to get in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Whereas now free after the, it shows after the sexual revolution and the advent of the birth control pill, what happened was you started seeing women, the value of prostitution actually decreased because men were able to get more free sex. Go ahead.
Another way of looking at it, and this was a point that was made by Schopenhauer many years ago, was that prostitutes have to exist because they're the altar on which the virtue of other women is sacrificed. So traditionally speaking, the value of prostitution, well, what's the value of just sex in general?
Right.
For the vast majority of human history, it's been, from a man's perspective, a lifetime of commitment, protection, and provision, which is an insanely high price tag for a sexual experience, especially since there's actually no guarantee that the sex will be particularly forthcoming after the man makes that commitment. But he's on the hook potentially for the rest of his life. So that's an extraordinarily high price to pay for sex, especially given the fundamental biological drive in young men to do that. And so the way that the lady can exist, Schopenhauer talks about, the European lady only can exist because there's the brothel down the street. And those women are the ones who are actually protecting the chastity and the virtue of these women.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's amazing.
Without them, they wouldn't be able to hold
They're
out.
almost like the rocks that the wave crashes against to protect the I see what you're saying.
And they usually get the most heat from those women, even though they don't understand that brothel is doing those women a great service.
Interesting. This is a video I've been sending to some of my female friends, especially some of their older, the 5 outcomes for women. I thought this was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant how you put statistics and percentages to each one of them. Can you go over those 5 outcomes?
Yeah. Wow. It's been a while since I made that episode.
So it had to do with a woman deciding to not drop her standards, a woman deciding to drop her standards, and there's 5 ones, and then the one woman deciding to be with no one. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember that there were 5 outcomes. The episode was called "The Way It All Ends." I put a lot of effort into it. Basically, it has to do with whether the woman gets the man that she wants and or gets the relationship that she wants. And those two things are not quite the same. So let's assume that most women are gunning for long-term commitment from a very high value man. The issue is that those are the men that most women want, and they are awash in optionality right now. And at least a proportion of those men are not going to be interested in settling down anytime soon. So if a woman wants to bag one of those high value men, she might have to relax her relationship strictures to accommodate him because his exclusive commitment might be too expensive for her to purchase, basically.
Right.
So she might end up with the man she wants, but not with the relationship she necessarily wants. Okay. And I think there's like a less than 5% chance of that occurring. I think that was on the episode. And I give the reasons on the episode as well. A more likely outcome is that she gets the relationship she wants, but not necessarily with her first choice.
Yes.
And these are the men who might have to compensate for their relative lack of attraction by offering things that more attractive men either could not or would not offer. Namely, exclusive commitment is the most salient thing. Exclusive commitment is something that women value very highly because it's something that they don't have to give. It's something that men as the gatekeepers of commitment can give. And it's something that the most attractive men are very loath to dispense with because of the opportunity costs associated with that and their, let's say, reproductive incentives. So these less attractive men can sometimes conjure value out of nothing by offering an exclusive commitment. I say that it's value out of nothing because they might not have any other options, right? So on some level, it might be expensive for that woman to commit because she could potentially have other partners or other men, but no one might be banging down that guy's door for sex or a relationship. So he is,
so his exclusivity is not worth anything.
The woman already had exclusivity with a guy like that, but he's able to conjure value out of nothing. In general, it's the partner, man or a woman, who has fewer options, who's going to be pushing harder for a sexually exclusive commitment in any given relationship.
And the fifth one was them not hooking up at all. A woman ended up alone. Was that the fifth one? I'm trying to remember. There were 5 different outcomes.
Yeah, the fifth one would be that they end up with nobody.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that was about 20 to 25%.
25%. Yeah. You the statistic, I think you brought up, 25% of women unmarried in their 40s. And then also 60% of women under 30 are childless. That was another statistic that I thought was interesting.
And also that I think over 80% of women who are childless at 40 were involuntarily childless.
Yes. Meaning like only 10% of them, it was because of medical issue. And the rest of them, it was because of
either a medical issue or they truly didn't want children for whatever reason. The other 80% did and thought that they had more time.
The other one that I really thought was great was, and I've given this advice many times, was the concept of a woman coming to you and saying, I jumped into a sexual encounter with a guy too quickly and it didn't work out. And so from this point on, I'm not going to jump into a sexual encounter. And your response to them was, no, I don't think things didn't work out because you jumped into the sex too quickly. And then also the concept of men wait. If a man is willing to wait for sex, that means he's got too much time on his hands. Can you go into that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. If a woman makes man wait, then she's going to end up with men with time on their hands.
Yeah.
And if a man is very busy, if a man is successful and a man has lots of options, that woman would have to be so insanely attractive to justify the expense and the opportunity cost of waiting that, I mean, just very few, vanishingly few women would be able to pull that off.
Yeah.
So I talk about giving the richest, creamiest milk possible, which is really, really important in a culture that, for better or for worse, exists in which sex precedes commitment.
Right.
We can argue about how it shouldn't be this way and it's leading to all these negative consequences, but that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. The fact of the matter is that in the West, sex happens first. You date casually for some weeks or some months, and then you define the relationship and it moves in that direction or not, right?
Right.
So that's another thing for women to appreciate. When I talk a lot about sex, it's like, well, yeah, but sex has important downstream consequences. Like downstream from sex is the commitment and the marriage and the children that you might want. Like you can't expect the man to give you that up front. That's just too high of a cost, especially in a market where that's not the progression that we've decided exists.
And that's why I believe you said a phrase that women end up punishing the men that they really want.
Well, yeah, and that's because punishing takes effort.
Right.
It takes time and it takes expense. If a woman doesn't like you, she's not even going to bother punishing you.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder what you think about this concept. I've said this before, that there's actually 3 genders: high status men, low status men, and women. And those low status men
that's harsh.
Yeah. Low status men are chasing the women. Those women are chasing high status men. And so a lot of times, the reason why I say the 3 genders is because when you consider, and I would say probably 55 or 1585, meaning the top 10% of men, and then the bottom 80 to 85% of men. The reason why I bring that up is because there's a book, The Winner Effect, that goes over like men who are successful. There's basically different neurology for these men. Their belief, there's abundance mentality versus a scarcity mentality, the number of sexual partners that they have over a lifetime, the amount of income that they get, and their overall life satisfaction is so completely different from these other men. And then when we get into this discussion, who cheats more, men or women? My answer is the bottom, like low status men cheat less, or can't cheat at all. High status men will cheat more, and then women will cheat however much that they cheat. And whenever we answer these questions, when we say men and women, when we say all men, we're just not including all men are. That's a bad way to look at it, because high status men are so completely different from low status men. When we talk to women, though, we do kind of see some similarities in what, like the way their hypergamy works. And so I don't feel like high status women and low status women think that differently. They all seem to find Jason Momoa and Chris Hemsworth attractive. But whereas high status men and low status men, when you were talking about before, a man willing to wait before he gives commitment, wait a long time to give up sex or to have sex. I was like, low status men will wait a long time to have sex. High status men is a wash and optionality. And so that's why I try to make that differentiation, because if you don't, then it's just all men cheat. All men are bad. All men are dogs.
I like that. I will push back on one point, which is that if you phrase it like that, I'm afraid that some men might hear, well, I'm not currently a high value man.
Yeah.
Michael says that I'm just a different gender, like I'm a different species.
Yeah.
I'm in this camp and there's nothing I can do about it.
Well, there's something you can do about it.
There's
for sure.
absolutely things you can do about it. That's what I'm pushing back against, which is that, I work with some guys, or I get the comments on the channel. It's like, I'm 5'6", or I don't have a lot of money. And it's like, yeah, but a lot of these things, not your height apparently, but a lot of these things can change.
Yeah.
I mean, before I moved to San Francisco, I was living in public housing in Brooklyn. I was broke, and now I'm definitely in the top 1% of earners. You know what I'm saying? When I started the YouTube channel 3.5 years ago, for the first year and a half, it would get 3-4 views per episode. Now it's getting millions. Yeah. So it's like, as a guy, you can actually move the needle in significant ways. When we talk about the top 10 or 20% of men, it's not like you're just born into that and you live there until you die.
Yes.
Like it's malleable.
It's a rite of passage you can go into
socioeconomics
and come back out of. Yeah.
In America, it's actually fairly mobile. America is one of the most socioeconomically mobile cultures that have ever existed on the planet.
Yeah.
And it can take a long time for men to get into that top 10 or 20%. Like I talk about in the book, that's ascending to your captaincy. And that can take 10 years of hard work with no guarantee of success.
Right.
It might take less time.
Right.
There's a great book on this. David Buss and Cindy Meston, both at UT Austin, wrote a book called Why Women Have Sex. They go over 237 reasons why women have sex.
Moly.
And then at the beginning of the book, Dr. Buss jokes, he goes, if we wrote a book called Why Men Have Sex, it would be a pamphlet.
No doubt.
Yes, it'd be much shorter. So what you said before, my girlfriend, she's mentioned this before. She says, she saw a picture of me at 21. I got to read that
book. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a great book. Now, only chapter 1 is about attractiveness. Chapter 8 is literally about extortion. Like it goes over every possible reason why men and women would have sex. But the variety, the negative kurtosis statistically of reasons why women choose men is so vast, as opposed to if I were to say, was Margot Robbie attractive in Wolf of Wall Street, and ask 100 men, all 100 hands go up.
Sure.
It was Selma Hayek attractive in Dusk Till Dawn? All 100 hands go up. But for women, they're like, is Jason Momoa attractive? You actually have women be like, he's too big or he's too hairy.
Sure, yeah.
They'll say things like this. And so it's really interesting. But yeah, that book absolutely changed. And then the other issue was, my girlfriend, one time she saw a picture of me at 21. He laughs at this every time. She goes, I would have dated you. My girlfriend is this gorgeous, she's like a world champion bikini model or whatever. And I'm like, you wouldn't have pissed on me if I was on fire when I was 21. But in her mind, my 46-year-old attractiveness was baked into the 21-year-old. She doesn't understand the difference of like 40 pounds of muscle, like income, education, 7 years in the US military. Like she doesn't see any of that. In her mind, it's just like, it's a fairy dust. It was sprinkled in and it was always there. And
well,
so
she'll always see you through the lens of her attraction.
Correct.
This is why it's the most important thing to keep a woman, to make her attraction exist at a consistently high level.
Yes.
That is by far the most important thing, because the issue is the same behavior will be perceived positively or negatively as a consequence of her level of attraction.
Yeah.
If she really likes you, she's going to think, oh, he's so confident.
Yeah.
you know, and if for whatever reason she's not feeling you so much, she's
You're
like,
cocky.
you're so arrogant. Like,
Yeah.
I can't stand this guy. He's so full of himself. He thinks he could do anything. It's the exact same fucking behavior,
Yeah.
but it's
Right.
being perceived through the lens of attraction differentially. And that's paradoxically why so many of the things that tend to attract us in the beginning of a relationship are the same things that piss us the hell off some years down the road when the fairy dust has trickled off.
Maybe the woman who is dating a guy who a lot of other women find attractive, and then they've been together for a while, and now she's annoyed by the fact that she gets all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the contrary would be the guy who picks up the girl from the strip club, and then later on it's like, I don't want you stripping anymore, right? It's the thing that he found attractive initially and alluring becomes annoying later. What you're saying?
Yeah, no, to segue into that, in one of your videos, you talked about, I believe it was called either attraction or status proxies, as opposed to the actual triggers.
Yeah.
And something you said was that when you were younger and you were a broke actor, you actually almost did better with women than when you were a successful psychologist.
For a while, yeah, until I got famous.
Right.
And that changed things.
Or you had status, right? So why do you think?
Well, I had status. I don't mean, like, as a doctor, you're a pretty high status role, and
well,
I
more
already was making a
recognition,
lot.
like
Fame is different from status.
Yes.
Right.
Let's go into that. So I asked, well, go ahead.
So my question was, where do you think guys go wrong? Because some guys think they need like some of these certain proxies, but it never actually ends up giving them that attraction or desire with women. That's what you see with your clients a lot of times, it seems.
Yeah. And I think the most common attraction proxy in men's imagination is money. And they think that if I just had $1 million, I would also be awash in optionality.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of millionaires in San Francisco who are sitting alone drinking in meat market bars on Polk Street because they never learned to approach a woman. If a woman did sit down next to him, he wouldn't know how to riz her up. He wouldn't know how to engage her emotions. He wouldn't know how to play the game of seduction and to maintain her interest at a very high level. And the fact of the matter is, your statistic notwithstanding, is that there is a man tonight who is unemployed, is living in his parents' basement, and is going to get fucked tonight. There are people in prison who are, women are traveling long distances for conjugal visits. You know what I'm saying? It's like this, whatever excuse you're giving yourself, it's like the men don't want to do the one thing that would directly improve their chances of getting women, which is increasing their communication and seductive skills.
Let me ask you, do you think that there is any kind of push? I mean, you read the American Psychological Association considers traditional masculinity to be harmful. But one thing I've said is that top 15% of men, while it's never been easier to get in that top 15% because you're being told not to be there, because Hank Moody is a scoundrel, because Harvey Specter is a scoundrel. Like, they don't want you to be that type of man. And so if you don't listen to that and you actually do the things like do the work, build a scalable business, become more charismatic, build up your riz, get a wider shoulder to waist ratio. I don't know if you've seen the study. Women have more orgasms with men with wider 1.65 to 1 shoulder to waist ratio. Exactly. You do all those things that are considered to be traditionally masculine that other people. Stoicism is one of the best examples. Stoicism is mistaken. For men, we see stoicism. I see a guy who's helping me solve problems. We work together. I don't need to look at his facial expressions to understand we're on the same team. Whereas a woman will see a man who's stoic as being like emotionally stunted. And I'm like, that's not, the fireman who saves your children is not emotionally stunted. He's just he doesn't need to have that expression right now. I was wondering, do you feel, because I know Myron asked you something about this, about the feminization of psychology, 5% of psychologists under the age of 30 are men, some number like that. They're in that instance, do you feel like, this is just my opinion, it's never been easier to get in that top 15%, but you're being taught to not be in it?
Sure. I think I was thinking of making an episode on this subject, that and both things are true. It's never been easier in the history of humanity to be very masculine. And it's also apparently never been harder. By the same token, it's never been easier to be feminine, but it's also never been harder. Think about it. How hard do you think it must have been to be feminine in the Wild West?
Exactly.
When there were no showers or indoor plumbing, and you had to keep all your clothes clean by hand, and cosmetics needed to be shipped, on a train for 2 months. It's like, and yet the women had their bustles and their coiffures, and they did what's best they could to keep up that femininity in really inhospitable environments. Think of how easy it might be to perform femininity in today's culture, given the accessibility of all the accoutrement and the convenience, and yet so few women do it. At least in our major cities.
I like to say, we get further and away from a survival scenario,
Yeah.
you start to see, like, for instance, gender roles did not exist because men were misogynistic. Gender roles existed for survivability
Survival.
because one of the two genders was on average 15% bigger with thicker bones, muscles, and more testosterone to do the hunting and to do the and protect against predation and to build shelter. Like, that's the reason why that happened. That there were more defined gender roles in part because of survivability. Whereas the further we get away from this is a good thing. Steven Pinker writes a book called Enlightenment Now, where he goes over why the world is actually better than at this point, at any point in history.
Sure.
The poorest people in the world can get antibiotics, whereas the richest man in the world in the 17th century would have been like Henry VIII, and he died of gout, right? Or the 15th century, he died of gout. Like something that would be easily curable today. I'd still rather be here today and poor than living in the 15th century and wealthy, right? So that kind of stuff. But when we go over that, the further we get away from a survival scenario, the more we can allow these mismatches, these evolutionary mismatches to happen, like feminized men or masculinized women. And then the other thing is, like I said before, the idea of like men's coming to passage, men teasing other men a lot of times is considered bullying. They're roughhousing is actually play. These things are being discouraged. And I think with the American, I was listening to Jordan Peterson talk about the APA thing, and he called it scandalous. And he was like, what's happened is these men providing masculine boundaries to their children. They're thinking that these things are all completely taught, but they always miss the part about men having 17 times as much testosterone as women, and testosterone regulating aggression, assertion, ambition, and libido. And they just sort of throw that out and just say, no, the only reason men are more aggressive is because they've been taught by other men to be more aggressive.
Yeah. Lot there. Okay. So I talk about the gender roles related to survivability in one of my episodes. I think it's like, when you're living close to a subsistence level in a hunter-gatherer society, you need to send your best hunters out for food.
Yes.
Right.
The decision to send suboptimal hunters when better hunters are available would be terrible for that community. But the more that there is an abundance of food or storehouses of that, and the more that we're elevated above necessity, well, why not give some of the B string a chance? It's like when a team is winning by 40 points, that's when
Put in the backup.
Put in
third
players get
strings,
some court time. And it's like, why not? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The issue is that it does lead to suboptimal outcomes, right? The third string players are third string for a reason, and they're not going to be scoring as many points. That might not be a problem in a game that is time bounded and is already in the bag. But in terms of, let's say, international competition and maintaining high standards of living in an increasingly global society, I think that when we act as if the game is already won and there's a time boundary, we might fall further and further behind relative to some of our international competition. Something to keep in mind. Now, what was the last point you made?
We were talking about
testosterone. This one's fun. So I think that one of the most educative video series on this issue, go to YouTube and type in T therapy F to M. So these are women who are going through sex change.
I know exactly
what you're talking about.
And at some point in their transition, they start taking testosterone. And it's like this light bulb goes off over their heads. And they're like, wow, I understand men now. I get it.
We see that a lot because we live in Vegas, and steroids and bodybuilding is a big thing here. And oftentimes, because women, to compete, they get on exogenous Anavar testosterone, and they're the ones who tell us like, oh, we get it now.
And we try to explain to them, your test levels got up to 100 and ours are at 900. You're still like, what you're considering is the horniest day of your life is Tuesday for us. Like, you still don't just whatever you're considering, multiply that by 17.
Well, I do have some sympathy for them because women don't have a refractory period. So that's something that these transitioning people talk about, where it's like they're really horny, but fucking doesn't make them less horny. Which is, oh gosh, that sounds pretty miserable to me.
That's pretty crazy. That one, talking about, there was a woman who actually got on anabolic steroids to be a bodybuilder, and she started talking about this outrageous level of horniness, and she, like, her levels weren't even the 400s, and she was
Wow.
saying that. I was like, that's crazy when you consider like
she's like a 10-year-old boy,
an unhealthy 25-year-old. He's still in the 500-600 total test range, and like the amount of horniness he suspects, and like also trying to explain this to women, whereas sex is the most meaningful and meaningless thing in the world. It can be both at the same time, and
Sure.
they can't grasp this concept. Is like, and the other thing, I was listening to Sadia Khan yesterday, and she had a quote where she was saying, the concept of like when men and women cheat, there's a significant difference, because
Sure.
if women cheat and they have pleasure from the sexual encounter, it's much harder to her to pull away from that. Whereas if a man has sex with a prostitute, he can still love his wife.
Well, I have read a study that suggests that there is no statistical difference in relationship satisfaction between cohorts of men who cheat and cohorts of men who
again,
don't.
Dr. Buss came up with that. So
I think I read that in
for women.
Evolutionary Desire,
So men, it's the men who cheat and men who don't cheat. They show no statistical difference. For women who cheat, 83% of the time they show less. I'm sorry, 79% of the time they show less satisfaction in the marriage when they cheat as opposed to not cheating. And 83% of the time, women fall in love with their affair partners. For men, it's like 29% of the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting how the reaction to cheating differs based on gender.
Mhm.
Like when a guy gets caught, what's the first thing he says?
He goes, I don't love her.
It didn't mean anything.
It didn't mean anything.
It didn't
Yeah.
mean anything. Why? Because
it's true.
it is
It's
true.
true.
But think about what's more important to women. Like
Yeah.
sexual fidelity is important to women, but on some level, emotional fidelity might
Is
be
worse.
even more. Some women are like, okay, I don't like it, but boys will be boys. And if it didn't mean anything and you still love me and you're still committed to me, then I don't like it, but maybe I'll turn a blind eye. So that's why the guy's reassuring, you're my one and only, you're my
There was
baby, I'm not
actually a
gonna leave
study
you.
on that too, where they evaluate infidelity and they evaluate what are the first questions each gender asks. And the woman will always ask the first questions usually, do you love her? And the man, when a woman cheats, the first question is, did you have sex with him?
Yeah. And by the way, for homosexual men, the first question is, did you fuck him? And for lesbian women, the first question is, do you love her?
Okay.
It actually transition. It goes past whatever your
Sexual
preference is. It's just men being men are more interested in, the way I like to say it is, for women, the cheating is the giving away of resources or emotional attention. And for men, cheating is penetration.
Let me go one step further. So we have this hypothetical situation where the man cheats and he gets caught.
Yeah.
Let's flip the roles. Let's say a woman steps out and she gets caught by her husband. If the first thing she says is, it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It was just sex. She's just made the problem 10 times worse.
100%.
10 times worse. Because as hard as that might be, if the woman instead had come to her husband and be like, we need to sit down.
Yeah.
We need to have a hard conversation. I've met somebody. It's been really hard. We've fallen in love and we want to start a family together.
Mhm.
Like that will be hard for that man to hear, but it's almost like, okay, I mean, she did it for a good enough reason on some level.
Sure.
Yeah.
But if it meant nothing,
Yes.
it's like you destroyed all of the trust that I have in you for this.
Yeah. I had to put in this much work to get access to you, and this guy put in no work and got the same access.
He's going to feel like a schmuck.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's a lot of. I have some female friends of mine, Jessica, or they come on the show and they're porn stars, and they'll talk about being in relationships and then filming with other men, and they come home and they're like, "Honey, it doesn't mean anything. I didn't even enjoy it. It wasn't that big deal." And I look at her and I'm like, "The other guy enjoyed it. He fucking enjoyed it, and he did nothing to earn it." Like that's the whole.
He got
problem.
paid to do it.
He got paid to do it, and I promise you, he enjoyed it. He doesn't feel bad about it at all. But yeah, that is a significant difference.
Did you see this Instagram post? I just saw it this morning, but it's about this Dubai princess.
No.
What happened?
I think she's actually royalty. I don't know if she's descended from the royalty or she married into royalty, but it caused quite a stir because she divorced her husband via Instagram post. Like it's this white text on a black background. It's very simple. And it's basically like, dear husband, since you enjoy the company of others so much, I'm divorcing you. I divorce you. I divorce you. I divorce you. Your wife, your ex-wife. And I of course don't know the situation, but reading the comments is just a goldmine for social observation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And
What were they saying?
on the whole, everyone was very supportive of her decision to do
Sure.
it. You know, know your worth. Don't put up with anything that demeans you. Absolutely. This guy didn't know what he's missing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I bring this up for a couple of reasons. Again, I don't know the basis of that relationship at all. But I do know that she was Arab royalty. And for what I know about the Arab men that I've consulted with, it's fairly common for these men to have multiple women.
Sure.
And that's usually discussed
beforehand,
pretty early in the relationship process.
Yeah. You saw the Jason Derulo thing. So Jason Derulo told his wife, I'm going to be seeing multiple people, got married.
Bill Gates did that. It was in his prenup.
Who did
really?
Bill Gates.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, it came out after the divorce, and she tried to kind of shame him.
Yeah.
In his prenup was, I think, he was allowed to take a vacation with his ex-girlfriend for 1 week, once a year.
Wow.
And he did that, I think, for several years. And this is something that she explicitly consented to. And she certainly didn't feel like it was demeaning when she was signing the marriage papers.
I think, and then this goes back to a function of status, like considering who was complaining when Derek Jeter was sleeping with Jessica Biel, Jessica Alba, and Mariah Carey. No one cared. Because Derek Jeter was a shortstop for the Yankees and no one had an issue with it. Whereas
A-Rod kind of got in some trouble too, which is interesting. Like, why did Derek get to stay so squeaky clean?
Was A-Rod married? Was that what the issue was? Because
I don't think he was at the time. No.
Well, I know the situation with Tiger, the problem was like Tiger Woods was cheating on his wife.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people had an issue with it. But it does feel like, I've heard women say this before. It's like, you aren't high status enough or rich enough or famous enough to be dating multiple women like this. So what's that saying is there is a price. There is a point at which men are high status enough. If you were to say, hey, do you think it's strange that George Clooney was philandering around like in his 20s? They'd be like, no, he's George Clooney. There's a point at which they're famous enough or high status enough to where nobody's like Dan Bilzerian or Hugh Hefner or someone like that to that point. But then she'll come back to you and be like, but you're not that guy. You don't get to do that. You don't get to have
I have a question for both of you. I want your perspective on this. Why do you think the perception of that like differed from person to person? So for example, with Derek Jeter, they were totally fine with it. But when it was Tiger Woods, who's equally of high status, he got shamed for it. Why do you think there was a discrepancy there?
I don't know.
I think Tiger was lying. I think the problem is like Derek Jeter.
It's because of the image he was
totally open about it. Yeah. I think that's part of the reason why some of that stuff happened. But let's go back to this, the concept of fame. You mentioned this before. I had Dan Bilzerian sitting on my show. And I said, can you rank the different factors that make women most attractive? And we were talking about status, pre-selection, what called make choice copying, all those different concepts. And he goes, fame is the hammer. Fame is the biggest one of all. Can you go over that?
I'm in an episode recently that was called Being Famous is Like Being a Woman. And for you alluded to this earlier, where when I was an actor, not a very successful actor, but I was an actor in New York City.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a lot of trouble hooking up with women.
Yeah.
None of these women wanted me as a long-term partner. And in retrospect, I can understand why. I was basically living month to month. I was in a small studio apartment with roaches. I had this just vague plan about being a successful actor, and who knows how I was actually going to get there. I wouldn't have yoked my oxen to that lifestyle either.
Yeah.
But if you have swagger, you're cute enough, and you're a young man, you can pretty much make things happen. So that changed significantly when I actually began to devote a lot of attention to my lifestyle. And I went back to grad school, became a doctor, bought a house, got a nice car, started making decent money, cleaned up my act in a lot of different ways. I think I'm objectively a much better man, a much better person than I was when I was a young man. And yet it was harder and harder to date because no one really knew what I was doing. By virtue of my profession in particular as a therapist, no one can know what I'm doing. There's like 30 people in the world who know that if I'm any good or not, and they're not going to tell anybody. They're not going to leave 5-star reviews. Oh man, Orion helped me with overcoming my depression. I wanted to kill myself, or I was sleeping with hookers and doing meth all the time. It's like, that's not generally what happens.
Yeah.
Do you see that a lot? Because I know you obviously do a lot of consultations. Do you often see that it's often a lot of guys who are objectively very successful who are struggling the most? Especially
I wouldn't say struggling the most.
Yeah.
Success definitely softens any struggles you might have. I do talk to a lot of successful guys because my consultation rate is fairly high at this point.
Yeah.
And they do have different suites of problems.
Yeah.
Like, I guarantee that being rich is not a surefire way to get laid.
Yeah.
Like, I've done consultations with multiple men worth high 8 figures, maybe even 9 figures. They have parties that they pay promoters to bring all these women on their own super yachts, and they can't get laid.
What do you think it is that they're missing oftentimes.
Well, they're missing confidence,
yeah.
which is one of the three things that absolutely will get you laid as a guy.
Could it be that the bubble that was created for them because of their money is the reason they didn't develop the confidence?
It's possible.
Yeah.
I'd have to go deeper into at what stage in their life they got the money.
Oh, that's
And
yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Really important to
Yeah.
know. But yeah, certainly, just like being a very attractive woman, especially a precociously attractive woman, for better or for worse, they might not need to develop other parts of their personality.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And I know you talked about like when you were an actor, something you said in that video is that like you were the contextual alpha.
Yes.
So it's almost better to
Which
be
is another way to get laid.
Exactly. So it's almost better to be like the big fish in the small pond than to compete with everything else.
Absolutely. If
Yeah.
you can. If you can. The issue in today's dating environment, though, is that there are fewer and fewer small ponds.
Yeah.
And that's because of social media apps like Instagram in particular, where
Mhm.
everyone is more or less swimming in one gigantic ocean.
Mm.
And men are competing for the girl next door against every other man on the planet. And women are competing for the most eligible bachelor in their small communities against every other woman on the planet. And it's taken people time to figure this out. I don't even think this is common knowledge yet. And it's certainly lost on people who got out of the dating market like even 5 years ago,
Yeah.
let alone previous generations, our parents or our grandparents' generation. They're going to look at this and just shake their heads at this. It's anarchy from their perspective.
Yeah. Oftentimes we see this a lot because with Men of Action, the coaching program, a big demographic of guys that we work with are guys who were in a marriage. So they didn't get on Instagram. They didn't do all these stuff because they were in a committed relationship. Then they go through a divorce. Now they're thrust back into the different market than they were in before.
It's so hard. It's almost like, imagine coming out of prison.
Yeah.
And it's like there's something called the internet.
Mhm.
Can you imagine?
Or marriage. Yes, I got you. Yeah.
But it's so different today. Like if
Yeah.
you're trying to rely on the strategies that worked even 10 years ago, let alone 25 years ago, in today's dating scene, you're going to be run over.
A lot of my
steamroller.
clients got married before the advent of Instagram in 2012, 2011, and then have gotten divorced. And it's like when I try to explain to them the importance of having an online profile, they're annoyed initially.
Of course.
And then later on, they come to the realization that it's absolutely the only chance I have.
And just to be clear, I'm not saying that it's impossible to get relationships. It's just that you have to change your strategies.
Yeah.
The strategies no longer work because the game has changed significantly. The way I describe it to some folks, especially those who are re-entering the dating market after divorce, is remember how like 10 years ago, if you're running a business, if you didn't have a website, you were functionally invisible.
Yes.
Like it didn't matter how successful your brick and mortar was, you needed an online presence to stay relevant. Nowadays, it's not enough. You need to have social media.
Yeah.
You need to have a social media presence to have a successful chance as a man in particular in today's dating market. And nobody likes it. I dislike social media. I don't have the apps on my own phone.
Really?
I don't know.
You have someone manage?
Someone
Absolutely.
else does
I don't get
YouTube
high on my
everything?
own supply,
Yeah.
dude. It's like those apps are dangerous.
They are, yeah.
You have to be very cautious about the content that you
Be
consume.
a social media producer, not a social media consumer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful tool. I think it's more powerful than a nuclear bomb.
Mm.
And we had some evidence of that in recent history, but I think people still haven't really realized that.
Mm.
And yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the reasons you're naming all these names. And unfortunately,
No, of
I
course.
don't know a lot of these people.
Yeah.
It's like for my own sanity, because I do know that I have addictive propensities, I have to put pretty rigid limits on what I expose myself to.
I actually had a question about like the evolution of your channel,
Sure.
going on to social media. I noticed that, looking back at your oldest videos, it was definitely more about like mindset, personal development and everything like that. And then you made this like slow shift into relationships and the sexual marketplace and intersexual dynamics.
Sure.
What like triggered that evolution for you?
Well, this was something that I had thought about and researched privately for a long time. It wasn't like I just discovered intersexual dynamics.
It was like before
2
the
years
YouTube
ago.
channel itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I was using it to great success in my own personal life and in my professional life and those that I was doing consultations with. But it's such a difficult, touchy subject that I was for a long time loath to even approach it at a distance. And when I decided to do it, I did so because I felt like it could be a net positive if it was presented in the right way.
Right.
One of the things that I did have in mind from the very beginning of the channel, it's like begin with the end in mind, right? I began with the end in mind, which is eventually this channel was going to be successful. I don't know if it's going to take a month. I don't know if it's going to take 10 years, but it will get there. And what's the danger of success? I've seen it again and again. You have too, is that once a person blows up, they go back to the record and they'll find something that this person said 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and look at this bad man, look at what he said. So from the very first episode, when 2 people were watching me and I was only getting 3 likes, I made it clear that I was never going to say anything on this channel that I wouldn't be proud of the whole world knowing, because eventually the whole world might know what I said.
Right.
And so this is tricky because we know how social media works. The more extreme you become, the more likely you're going to get views and clicks. And so there is this propensity when you're starting a channel and you're just talking into the void. Like, it's a lot of work and no one gives a shit for a very long time. And people start to get desperate. I felt this pull. It's like, well, maybe if I start doing some more extreme shit, I can get some attention. And I was like, no, that's a short-term solution that compromises my long-term goals.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think actually got your channel to grow? Because it seems like it grew like exponentially. It like hit a breaking point.
Sure. The way that growth works on social media is very different from growth in other parts of your life. Like if you want to get your fitness on track, you generally see gradual progress almost immediately.
Yes.
Right? On social media, nothing happens for a long time and then everything happens at once. The way that growth happens on social media is through virality.
Right.
And I can give recommendations on starting a YouTube channel if that's something that you want, but I don't know if we want to go there.
We can. Sure.
We can.
One of the things that's really important to understand is that the market is saturated with demands on people's attention. Just asking for 10 seconds of somebody's attention is an enormous ask in the digital marketplace. If you have a 20-minute video with 3 views, no one is going to give you 10 fucking seconds of their life. There is no reason to be making 20-minute videos if you don't have an audience. No one is going to give you a shot. That's just the way it is. So if you don't have people watching, you need to make it too short to suck. It needs to have one single, easily digestible idea, and it needs to be something that's shareable, because that's what drives virality. Someone needs to give it a shot. There needs to be something sticky about that idea. And that person has to say, you know what? I bet Tom would really resonate with this. I'm going to send this over to Tom. And it's that web of sharing that creates the cascade that attracts the algorithm's attention.
How do you like work with that constraint, but also not fall into the trap of like saying the most viral thing or saying the most clickbait thing? I mean, it seems like there's a fine line there.
Absolutely. Like there's certain things that I won't do on the channel just because I've decided not to do them. Like I don't do reaction videos. I will never do reaction videos. I try not to, I definitely try to stay away from clickbaity titles. I don't even do paid promotions. Like there are certain things that I do that absolutely, if I did them, I would have 5 million subscribers by now. I'd be making 10 times as much on this channel. But for whatever, I didn't start this channel to make money. That's the other thing. The money is obviously nice, but like I had other things in mind when I started this, which we could talk about if you'd like. But the idea here was my train of thought.
Where you wanted the channel to go, and you didn't want to compromise.
So I just have these Batman rules. That's what I call them, which is like, I made an episode about that. As a guy, you kind of need to have these self-imposed rules that keep you on the side of sanity. And once you become successful, prevent your life from really going off the rails.
Right.
So there's just some things that I've decided not to do, and limitations can actually drive growth. This is why often a lot of artists, whether they're filmmakers or musicians, some of their early stuff is great because they didn't have millions of dollars on equalizers and people who are making their music sound this, that, or the other, and they needed to make it fit for the radio. They were unique, they were raw, they were authentic, and they lose that the more help and money and that they get. And I think that it's really important to kind of maintain some of that authenticity. Authenticity is going to become, we're now in the attention economy. That's what they say. I think what's going to happen after that is the authenticity economy.
Interesting.
Because it's going to become more and more difficult to differentiate the real from the simulation. And real was going to have a very high price tag associated with it.
Speaking of the authenticity, one thing I do recommend for some of my friends is that you being able to record content needs to be as easy as possible. I noticed, are you doing this from your home often? You have like a schedule?
It's always
where
from my home.
Yeah. I mean, that probably making it a lot easier. I know some people, they'll drive a long way to go to some, like I can see my apartment from here. Like they'll drive to some far away place and everything has to be perfect. And it takes 30 minutes to set up. And I noticed with yours, and this is what I try to do too. Initially, I filmed my first program from with my computer screen. And I didn't even have a nice camera. I had a little 720 camera. And I filmed 50 hours of content like that and sold millions of dollars worth of subscriptions just from that one idea.
Yeah.
And I noticed with you, because I have a buddy of mine who's very, very wealthy and he's coming up with his own course and he had all these ideas. And I was like, bro, you need a schedule where when you get out of the gym, you go sit in a chair, push one button and start recording and then send it to the editor and make it as simple as possible so you can do this over and over again.
Consistency really matters with respect to the algorithm. You train the algorithm what to expect of you.
Yeah.
And that pays off in the long run. And the more complicated your logistics become, the less likely you're going to stick to that cadence over the long term.
Yeah.
You want to remove the obstacles in the path of your desired action as much as possible. If you want to start going to the gym, pack a bag, have it next to the door with your workout clothes already inside of it so you don't have to get that together. It only takes 30 seconds to get that together, but in that 30 seconds, the decision about whether to go to the gym is made or not made.
Yeah.
The vast majority of our time is wasted in the 10 seconds where we open up doubt as to whether we feel like doing something that we decided we wanted to do.
Yeah.
That's why I never ask myself those questions.
That's brilliant. Yeah, no, I love
that.
My gym is in my building. Like that really made a huge difference for me. And then doing my live streams in my den right next to my bedroom. And it made things much easier. One other thing I do want to ask you about, we were talking about fame before. And we never really discussed how this has changed for you. You live in Northern California. You personally, has it changed with your dating life? And what have you seen fame overall as being like sort of a hammer when it comes to dating? And then for you specifically?
Well, fame just makes everything easier. Like the fact of the matter is that most men never have the experience of being pursued by a woman.
Yes.
Ever. They have to make something happen. They have to approach the woman at the bar. They have to strike up the conversation, even on online dating. Fun fact, they've changed that on Bumble. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, you can pay so that you can message them first. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm suggesting that the women eventually complained that they had to message the men first, that it was too much pressure for them or something.
So they lifted the main feature of the app, basically.
Basically, yeah.
It's because as also, if you look at like the stocks of all the dating apps, that one was plummeting.
And you mentioned women are still waiting for the offer. You also had a podcast where you talk about that. Women are still waiting to be asked.
On the whole, they are. And that's a strategy that they might be able to get away with when they're young and at their peak levels of attraction. Like the most beautiful woman in the world is a flower. She can stay rooted in the place and the whole world comes to her. Now she has to send out her pheromones. She has to send out her scents and she has to have nectar there to attract, but she has within herself all of the ability to call to her the things that she needs and wants. But that's changes. And a lot of women, as they enter into their 30s, they haven't updated their browser and they're still operating under a strategy that may have been appropriate when they were young and at their peak levels of attraction, but is just going to be relationship suicide potentially at that point. But I thought that women never initiated, or to put it another way, that the women that initiated with me, because I have in the past been tried to be picked up by some girls.
Yeah.
Girls do it really badly on the whole. They're very bad at picking up. They got no riz. And it was usually not the women that I would want to approach if I was in the mood to approach. And so I get it. They were trying to drum up some action, which is kind of what you have to do if waiting around isn't working. So like good initiative women, but work on the execution, right? Yeah. It's not true. If you're a very, I won't even say successful, but it's like if you have renown, if you have fame, women will come to you. Like I get marriage proposals every week.
Wow.
And I assume that those are authentic.
Yeah.
And these are from women all over the world. And they're offering all kinds of things. And they send me all kinds of things. And it's a little, it took some getting used to.
Yeah. Do you believe in this concept? So you're in your 40s, I'm in my 40s. Growing up, there was not really a mid-tier level of fame. There was like Tom Cruise and Ronald Reagan, like we're up here. And then there's like the janitor. There was no like mid-tier level of fame. Now you have, you know, like say a Patrick Bet-David or an Aiden Ross, just like a streamer with several million followers, right? And he's not as famous as like a political candidate, but he's still somewhat famous. And what I was explaining to some of my friends, some of these guys, because fame sounds very audacious. Fame sounds very ambitious. A lot of guys like, I'm never going to be famous.
You
But
don't
I'm
have
like,
that.
there's a guy here. He's the top attorney in the city, Steve Demopoulos, and he's got a couple of billboards up. And he says, women notice me all the time. I have another buddy of mine, Doc Vegas. He's one of the top plastic surgeons here. And like, women are always coming up to him and talking to him. And I'm saying there's this local level of fame that did not exist in the 80s and 90s that exists now because you can have a couple 100,000 subs on YouTube or a couple 100,000 followers on Instagram, and you can be somewhat of a local celebrity that didn't exist before. And even a level below that, the guy who gets recognized going into every club or gets recognized whenever he goes to his favorite dining establishment or something like that, there's like a lower tier level of fame that exists that just didn't exist before, and men can take advantage of that.
They certainly can.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different, I think, than local fame.
Yeah.
Like this guy with the billboards,
Yeah.
they're here in Vegas.
Yeah.
If you were to go to Miami, I doubt that anybody would recognize
sure.
him. However, social media fame is a little bit different than, let's say, mainstream media fame,
Yeah.
being a TV star or a movie star, an athlete. I get recognized all over the world.
Mhm.
I got recognized in Tokyo. I get recognized in Europe. It usually happens once or twice a day at this point. But if you weren't in that silo, if you weren't captured in my audience, you might not know anything about me. So it's actually kind of the best of both worlds, because I certainly wouldn't want to be so famous that I couldn't go anywhere without people recognizing me. Like, being invisible is useful if you can choose it. The issue is that a lot of guys have it foisted upon them.
Yeah. Right.
And that's not a good thing to be. Like, invisibility as a man is a death sentence. You have to take risks. That's part of the reason why I think men have lower life expectancies, because being perpetually invisible, being perpetually low status has enormous survival and reproductive consequences for men.
Yeah.
They're willing to do all kinds of things to stand out and to make something happen.
Yeah. This is probably what the studies show, that monogamous societies are less dangerous than polygynous societies, because you have a group of men at the bottom who don't have any relationship chance, because there's men at the top who have 2 or 3 wives. And when you have that, those men have to take more risks. And then so there's where you see more aggression, violence.
And we're becoming a more polygynous society, for sure. But I don't know if the risk is still there.
Because the men can sit at home and play video games and watch pornography.
Exactly. Like, if without those anesthetizing principles, yes, it would be scary to have 30% of men under 30 when they are strong and energetic and banding together in groups, prowling the streets. That's the angry man hypothesis, right? But they have free weed, or not free weed. They have like legal weed, and they have free porn, and they have all kinds of things to keep them in a dissipated.
Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming out next year. That's the end. That's the end for men.
End of it all.
Certainly for several hundred hours, I imagine. And so society doesn't really have much to fear these men. They're not benefiting from these men. And I think society is suffering, but not nearly as much as those men themselves are suffering.
So can you go into something you said? You were going into men and women's greatest enemies. You talked about men's greatest enemy being cowardice. Can you go into that?
Sure. I think that in many respects, everything that a man wants, at least in the game of mating and dating, lives on the other side of fear. And men are afraid of approaching women. They're afraid of approaching women given some of the cultural moments that we're passing through, like Me Too, especially in San Francisco, where
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's the hotbed of progressive ideology.
My friends who are strippers here make more money when they go to SF than any other place.
No kidding.
Because the women are not here. A woman is not chastised for being attractive or wearing less clothes or going out and having a bikini body and having long. Women are not chastised for that here. In San Francisco, it seems like they are a little bit more. And so these men who are consistently seeing women who are not quite at the same level, they go to the strip club and it's like girls from Las Vegas, and these girls are like, I'm making 5 times as much in San Francisco as I would in Las Vegas.
I don't know if they're chastised. That might be their experience. But it certainly isn't the vibe. But you could clean up as a feminine woman in San Francisco.
Yes, I imagine.
Exactly my point.
You could clean up as a masculine man in San Francisco as well. It's so easy to be the best dressed man in a room in San Francisco.
I've noticed that, because living here where like fitness is a big thing, there's a lot of fame. Obviously you have the strip. Then I go back to a place like Boston where, like, again, similar to San Francisco, but just on the East Coast, it is very easy to clean up there. If you're a feminine woman or you're a masculine man.
Absolutely. Like, especially if you're straight. Like the best dressed, best looking guys in San Francisco, 9 out of 10 of them are gay, and they kind of compete with themselves. It's a hotbed of competition there.
Yeah,
it's a pretty interesting microcosm. But if you're a straight guy, very easy to clean up in San Francisco. But there might not be the kinds of women that you might want in terms of your optionality.
Yeah, absolutely.
But cowardice is overcoming that fear, and there is something that I think is inherently off-putting about female rejection, because female rejection in a sexual context is associated with reproduction and survival of one's genes. So when a woman is saying no to a guy, she's functionally saying on some level, I don't think that you should reproduce.
Right.
Like you should go extinct.
Yeah, what an insult.
Your genes are getting weeded out of the
the
pool,
like what you got probably doesn't deserve to continue to exist much longer. Like that's not what I think the vast majority of women intend.
Cognitively, they don't think that. Subconsciously, maybe that's what
potentially they do, or they think that, okay, well, there's going to be some other woman potentially who wants this, but like it's cuts very deep for men.
Yeah.
And the first cut is always the deepest. The second cut is probably the second deepest. And after you get cut a few hundred times, you start to develop a callus around that attribute of your consciousness. And you realize that it's just information and it's just a game.
You mentioned 100 rejections. At that point, it's just information. I told that to my clients as soon as I heard that. What a great way to look at it when you talk about it was pain, personal, and I forgot what the third one was. Permanent. And how these things, now after a while, the rejection, you start to understand this woman who doesn't even know you, who rejected you, it can't be personal because she doesn't even know you.
Of course.
And the pain starts to go away. And then when you talk to the guys who are really successful with women, you say, what were you like in your 20s? You're like, I was getting rejected too. You know, before I was famous, I was getting rejected too. And then you start to resonate with that and be like, oh, this is just a part of growth.
And let's be clear that even if you are a high status famous guy, doesn't mean that you never get rejected either.
Yes.
James Bond gets rejected in his own movies sometimes, you know, especially the Daniel Craig ones.
Yeah.
So that's something like the best men are generally the best baseball players. They still strike out more than they get hits.
Yeah.
But you can kind of move the needle as a game of statistics over hundreds and hundreds of playthroughs. But absolutely, think about it like kids when they're on a playground. You have a ball, you want someone to play with. Hey, you want to play catch? No, I want to play foursquare. The kid doesn't just like fall into a puddle of tears.
Yeah.
He just says, oh, okay, do you want to play catch? You do? Hey, great. Get over. You just keep moving until you find someone that wants to play with you.
That's one thing. I felt excluded in some groups in high school when I got to UT Austin. No matter what I was into, there was a group of people that were into video games or football or whatever. It was because there was just so much more of an abundance. Me living in the largest dormitory in North America, there was just such an abundance of people to meet and hang out with. Back when I was doing that. This is another thing you also talked about. People go through different states, especially you'll deal with a woman. She'll be in a good state, in a bad state. One of the things I really
What do you mean
love,
good and bad?
happy and sad.
Okay.
Sometimes. And the reason why I bring that up is you talked about waiting 6 days to contact a girl after a date. I had FitX Fearless on my show, and we had the same discussion. If I go out with a girl and we have a really good interaction, I tell her, I seed, hey, you need to contact me the next day. Let's meet up, whatever. But she needs to contact me because I don't know where her emotional state is when I reach out.
Yeah.
You made that point, and I thought it was terrific the way you made that point. But I know when she reaches out to me, I know she's in a positive emotional state and things can go better.
Absolutely. Like regardless of the pretext, and there's going to be some sort of pretext like, hey, here's a meme made me think of you.
Yes.
Or, oh, I got the book that we discussed in our conversation. Can't wait to read it. Like it's going to have something that has nothing to do with dating and sex and wanting to see you. But when a woman reaches out of her own accord, the subtext is, I want to see you again.
Yes.
I'm ready for you. I was missing you. If you ask me, the answer will be yes.
Yeah.
Which is why in general, it's always good, no matter what stage of the relationship that you're in as a man, to force the women to advance the relationship.
Yeah.
Because when they are put in a position to have to do so, if you want to advance the relationship, the answer will be yes. The answer will be yes. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. On the other hand, if you get there first, maybe you catch her on a good day, maybe you catch her on a bad day. Like if I reach out to a woman out of the blue, who knows what emotional state she's in, and she's going to perceive my unwanted intrusion into her attention through the lens of that emotion.
Yeah.
And God forbid I get associated because of that with some negative emotion that she might be passing through. That's actually that could be the end of that that street.
And you talk about the emotional lens, because I think a lot of guys don't understand this, because
It's
we
so
don't,
important.
because we as men don't have that lens. If a woman is attractive,
we do, but we can
To a
turn it
lesser
off.
degree.
so
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, if a woman is really attractive, she's attractive when we're in a bad mood and when we're in a good mood, is what I'm saying.
Fair enough.
So what I'm saying, that emotional lens is the same. Whereas I've talked to guys before, they had an unbelievable night talking to a girl all night, and the next day they call her and she's either dehydrated, or she's come down from the Molly and has serotonin deficit, or something weird has happened, and you're like, you don't understand what you did wrong. And it's like, no, you just caught her on one side of the merry-go-round, and she just happened to but when you wait for her to contact you, you know she's at the top of the Ferris wheel. You know she's not now down here at the bottom. And so I thought that was really great. And the other one, you just brought this up, and I didn't even think about this till right now, is the concept of, I always tell men, the where are we, or what are we discussion needs to be initiated by her.
Of course.
It can't be initiated by you. Can you talk about that also?
Well, it's just first of all, it's important for her to do so because it's sort of like the least minimum required effort.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if the man is the gatekeeper of commitment, the woman has to at least fucking knock on the door.
Yeah.
Because think about it, women are gatekeepers of sex. They're not just going around handing out sex to every man who wants it. The men have to knock, and they generally have to have some sort of value proposition that's sufficiently attractive to even get her to open the door a crack. And then there's a lot of work that needs to be done after that point in the vast majority of cases. So it's important for women to at least make the effort if that's what they're looking for, because they're not just handing out what men want on the other side of things. So if they want that, then they have to ask. That's the least required effort. And they generally have to make some sort of value proposition, just like the men did to get into that situation to begin with. I think that's fair.
And you also mentioned before about women's necessity for attention being similar to men's necessity for sex.
It's the most rewarding thing you can give a woman.
Yeah.
Just like sex is the most rewarding thing you give a man.
So I also had this analogy, which is, if a woman, like say if I had a daughter and I heard she was having sex for nothing, basically to whatever guy was asking her to have it, I would be disappointed as a father because she's giving away sex for nothing. And I would use the analogy of men giving away their attention for nothing, leaving heart eye emojis on women's Instagrams who are never going to write them back. When a man gives away his attention for nothing, he also loses his value. But when a woman gives away attention, it doesn't cost her anything. Just like when a man gives away sex, it doesn't cost him anything. And I think men get confused by that. They walk into the strip club and the girl grabs him like, oh my God, you're so cute. And he thinks this is real, but it costs her nothing in exchange for the money that he's going to give her. And I feel like men get this confusion where they're receiving attention from women as opposed to compliance. And they think it's the same thing, not realizing that it doesn't cost women get anything to give you attention.
Yeah. So there's probably a lot there. We know that there are sex differences in the perception of attraction in men and women. This is why every man has fallen in love with a barista at some point in his life. Like, she smiled at me and she smiled a little bit longer than she usually does the customers. I think there's something there, brother. Now, I've picked up baristas and waitresses and things like that, but generally they're just being friendly, and it's their job to be friendly. But men are more likely to misinterpret friendliness as sexual interest than vice versa.
Right.
And I wonder though, if that's truly an innate sex difference or a consequence of the fact that so few men get a lot of experience getting attention from women. And I think that
so they're not even adapted to it.
Well,
Yeah,
I think it could be both, because I don't know if you saw the Safeway study. Safeway had basically had it where the cashiers would say, hey, Mr. Smith, thank you for shopping at Safeway. Hey, Mrs. Smith. When men did it to men, no problem. When women did it to women, no problem. When men did it to women, no problem. When female cashiers said to men, thank you for shopping at Safeway, the men would follow them outside. They would start stalking them, to the point that Safeway had to stop doing it for a while, because men were misinterpreting it. Dr. Buss calls this overperception bias in men, thinking that every single interaction with a woman, no matter what it is an invitation for sex. And in an ancestral period, that was probably functional. In today's period, that will get you thrown in jail. And I think there's an evolutionary mismatch where men don't recognize that. They don't recognize that concept that everything that a woman, and this is another thing. There was another study. I thought this was fantastic. They showed a man and a woman, very neutral positions, and they were studying together, and they were sort of facing each other. And they asked the men, is this woman attracted to this man? It was something in the order of like 50, 60% of the men said, yes, she was attracted. They took the same woman or it took a different woman in the picture, same exact position, but she was more attractive. Her boobs were pushed together. She was wearing makeup. Is she attracted to him? And more of the men mischaracterize the more attractive woman as being more interested in sex. This is what I explain to my girlfriend sometimes. It's like, it's not just that men misinterpret that everything you do is an invitation for sex. The more attractive you are, the more they will make this mistake. Meaning they will assume you want sex more, not because you waved at them, blinked their eyes, but just because your boobs are bigger. They will make more of this inference and more of this mistake.
Yeah, people generally want to, they see what they want to see.
Yeah.
They don't see reality. Everything is mediated through perception. You've never experienced anything outside of your own consciousness.
Yeah.
And unless you have a pure and serene consciousness that is always indefinitely in that state, you're going to be distorting what information comes in. And that might be imperceptible to you as the agent who's making use of the contents of your consciousness, right? So that makes total sense to me. There's lots of other interesting intersexual differences. Like, for example, I think that women often disrespect men unintentionally.
I was going to go into this. It's not possible for a woman to love a man she does not respect. Can you go into that? Like, do you remember this?
Sure. I think that that's
but
slightly different than what I was going to get
Go
into.
ahead.
Let me make
What's
my
your
point
concern?
first,
Yeah.
which is, let's say I'm walking down the street and we're coming in opposite directions, and I kind of look over at you and I go,
yeah,
hey, you just nodded right back.
Yeah.
Like, that's the code. If I were to nod at you and you looked at me and just like kept on walking, be like, oh, bro, that was harsh. In fact, in Kill Bill Volume 2, that's why Pai Mei went on his rampage. He was walking in the forest. He nodded at some guy. Maybe he didn't see him. He didn't nod back, and he demanded satisfaction. He killed the whole White Lotus Temple. Now, a lot of women correctly understand that making eye contact and reciprocating gestures to a man might be perceived as an invitation to an unwanted conversation or interaction.
Yeah.
Now, that said, some men maybe are just being friendly. And so they'll nod at women, and the women who might be seeing that as a bid for interaction as opposed to just a gesture of social recognition don't reciprocate. And so that's just a very minor way in which men might feel disrespected by virtue of behavior that women maybe appropriately execute in order to keep themselves safe or to prevent an unwanted interaction. But it might not feel that way to a man, especially a nice guy who just was, I'm just being polite. I was just being socially acceptable here. And this woman just wouldn't even look my way. I mean, that does hurt when you're not even seen.
But not seeing it from her standpoint. Maybe she's had a previous interaction where somebody took it way too far, followed her outside the gym, followed her outside of class and things like that, and just couldn't get the hint.
It's a failure of intersexual understanding, as we say.
Yeah,
right?
Most of it comes from that. Yeah. But I do want to talk about this. It's not possible for a woman to love a man she does not respect. And I was just curious because this is a conversation I've had with some women before where it's like, it feels like for them, love is this like fiery, red hot lava emotion that's in there. And then, so when she loves a man, she'll do things that are like, she might even consider crazy to the point where she's constantly testing him, basically jealousy. She might even break his stuff, but in her mind, she's justified because she loves him, because love for her is this fiery, red hot emotion. Whereas for men, when we work together, men, it's like respect is this straight line. It's like, we're protecting the line. We're protecting the brand. It is if I had a wife, it's important for my wife to not embarrass me in public or say something behind my back that would endanger the relationship, because if she does so, she's not showing respect, and other people that she sees that she's not showing respect. That's not red hot, fiery love, though. That's a very different way of showing love, is through, I like to say, protecting the brand. Like what grandma and grandpa, when grandma like doesn't want the granddaughter to get pregnant by some young boy, like she's kind of protecting the brand. She's showing respect to the family. And I was just curious, in your conversation, when you say it's not possible for a woman to love a man she does not respect, what do you mean from that specifically?
Yeah, I like that little anecdote about the passionate woman who breaks the stuff. I've dated some of those women in the past, and that's exactly what their line was. Well, I just love you so much.
They're justified.
And I said, then please, for the love of God, love me less. Like I might not be able to survive your love. It's destroying me, and it's destroying our relationship, which obviously didn't go over very well. But I see this, not to disagree with anything you said. I think that all that is well said. I think when I talked about this, I was coming about it from a slightly different angle, which is, first of all, it's important to differentiate two different kinds of respect, because this apparently was lost on some people when I made this episode. Is there's respect in the sense of we can call basic human dignity. Like I respect everybody, regardless of their station or their status in life. But that's on some level like in a basic human dignity. It's like a social virtue. Okay, we're not talking about that right now. The more masculinized version of respect is you've done something extraordinary, and I'm acknowledging that. You don't give away respect until there's an acknowledgement of superior or extraordinary ability. Okay. And in that sense, I think it's important for women to respect their men, because it's the acknowledgement that there's something superior or extraordinary about this guy. That allows them to look up to that man, which is an important component of, let's say, emotional hypergamy. Okay. I've done, which I don't think anyone's talked about this, and maybe I should do an episode about it.
Yeah.
There are some guys who on paper meet all of the hypergamous standards of women traditionally. And yet, because of the way that they act, usually by adoring the woman, by putting her on a pedestal, by putting her in the place of the adored while occupying the place of the adorer, she doesn't feel as if her hypergamous commitment criteria have been met. He is looking up at her, which means that she's looking down at him, regardless of the fact that he could be 6'2" with washboard abs, make 7 figures, drive a Ferrari, be a committed family man, everything that she wants. The fact that she's looking up at him, the fact that he's looking up at her means that she's looking down at him, which means on some level emotionally, she's going to think that she could do better, because women they're generally looking up.
So even though objectively he's higher value, emotionally he's not.
Correct.
And could that also be part of hypergamy though? Like, so her hypergamy is a evolutionary algorithm that's sifting the alphas from the betas, and that is that is the sign that her great grandmother saw as being a beta male as being overly emotional or pedestalizing women.
Possible, and that's a way that women can be vulnerable, because there's some guys who actually don't have very much to offer at all, but because they're dominant, because they're very courageous and they're confident, they can trick a woman into thinking that her hypergamous criteria have been met because she is looking up to him. She is following his lead. And so she thinks there must be something special about this guy, because I don't usually follow men. I don't usually look up to men. And I'm doing that in this case. Therefore, to resolve the cognitive dissonance of why they're doing something they don't ordinarily do, they think, I must really like this guy because he must be something special.
Yeah. We see that trope happen a lot, where like we see it all the time just living here, where it's like really successful guy, he's like getting taken advantage of, his girl doesn't respect him, and then there's like the broke actor, broke male stripper, broke dancer, whatever, and she's all in love with him.
The
so
VIP
that's a perfect
host,
example. The VIP host, the promoter, that's a perfect example, I think, of what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, the VIP hosts and promoters actually talk to hundreds or thousands of women every year. They're going to be very, very good at talking to women. And that's one of the best ways to both get and keep a woman is with your words. If you know how to use your words and to communicate in a way that women can hear you and understand you, then you don't need the money. You don't need the cars. You don't even need the abs. Because dominance is psychological. Like, look at me. I'm not the traditional alpha dude. You know, I'm not towering over other men. I don't have this bulky build. I wasn't jumping out of helicopters with a semi-automatic. It's like, I'm not Rambo. I'm in a very feminized profession. I talk to people about their feelings all day. You know what I'm saying? But I am very dominant in my relationships because dominance is psychological.
Right. It really does, though. When you think about it, having a daughter, how scary is that? It's just words now. It's just like she can be fooled into finding attraction to a man just because of words.
It was always words. Though. The issue is that
always.
This is not anything new.
Okay.
It's not like her vulnerability to words suddenly hit the scene 20 years ago with the internet. This is something, though, that was harder to exploit in the past when women were protected by their fathers, by their male relatives, and relationships were more explicitly transacted and arranged. Like, you couldn't really rizz up a girl if you were already arranged to be married to somebody else by the time you were 2. Like, it would be irrelevant. But the susceptibility must have always been there, because I don't think it just spontaneously emerged in recent years. Like, people don't change that.
There's just quickly. Like more of an ability to exploit it, I guess. Got it. Because relationships aren't explicitly transacted and arranged like they were in the past, which created both liabilities and opportunities in the sexual marketplace.
The part that women always leave out. I've said this before. Women. So the reason why women will give dating advice and it confuses men is because they'll say, I want flowers. I want a man who's emotionally vulnerable. And I'm like, if a homeless person came up to you and gave you flowers or was emotionally vulnerable, you tell them to get away. What you don't want is a man to bring you flowers. You want the man you're attracted to bring you flowers. What you don't want is a man to be vulnerable. You want the man you're attracted to bring to be vulnerable to you. But you cannot conceive of being attracted to a man you're not attracted to. So therefore, that's already baked in, and that's what's confusing to men, because most women aren't attracted to most men. And so now you have the guy who's bringing the girl flowers and she's confused why this whole thing's going on.
Certainly. Yeah. Again, very well summarized, Michael.
Yeah.
And I think that's another important part to make explicit is if it's obvious in these explanations that whatever the woman is saying, flowers, emotionally vulnerable, if she wants those things from the men that she's attracted to, then they must have nothing to do with their attraction.
Yes, exactly.
Because they're
so great.
Decided that they were attracted to those men before they had a chance to give them flowers or to be emotionally
I like to say
vulnerable.
attraction and comfort. She's describing comfort things as if, which are things that she likes, but it's not things that make her sexually aroused.
My little pet hypothesis about this is they're thinking about this one really attractive ex that they really wished could give them the commitment or the relationship that they desired.
Yes.
And so they're kind of making this Frankenstein. It's like that, if that guy would also have remembered my birthday, like he would have been perfect. So what I really want is someone to remember my birthday.
Yeah.
But that's just the icing on the cake, which was whatever that man was doing to increase her attraction to the point that he didn't have to remember her birthday.
And that's the part that she leaves out.
Yeah. And the comments to that are almost like the left by women are also pretty informative, because they just sort of roll their eyes and they're like, are you serious? Like, are guys so dense that we actually have to say that? I thought that was taken for granted.
Yeah.
Like, of course we're going to want an attractive man, but it's gauche to say that so explicitly. They think it's just assumed and implied. But a lot of men, for a number of reasons, one is that they generally have good hearts, but soft minds. And they go and they actually take what is stated very literally and concretely. Yeah. Which is both a benefit of masculine communication and a liability. And they listen and they think, okay, great. If I do A, B, and C, then, which I'm willing to do, then and that will increase my chances of getting what I want, sex in a relationship. I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah. And what makes it confusing, I've had multiple playmates, huge models on the show, and I always ask them, like, what is the thing that you find attractive in men? And the description is never about height, money, status, dominance, anything. It is always, he's really nice and sweet to me. He cares about animals. And I'm just like, and then I asked them, so describe your ex. And their ex was always a narcissist. And I'm like, well, first off, I've had 10 girls in here at once before. And I'm like, how many of you dated a narcissist? And they all 10 raised their hand. And I'm like, only 4% of the US population are narcissists. This math doesn't work out. And then later on, when I asked the girls, like, what do you want in a relationship? And they describe all these very cookie cutter guy next door, very, very nice church choir boy qualities. And then you ask them who they actually dated, and they describe the tattoo sleeves, the fact that he used to sell steroids, he's a male stripper, and like he hit her. Like, and you just like, do you understand? And then I ask him, like, do you understand the disconnect? How you described who you dated, this man had sex with you, and then you describe what you want. And when guys bring that to you, then you aren't attracted to them, and they can't. Like, the dissonance is still there, because the concept, like for us as men, we know we have to do things to build ourselves to become more attractive. But women, because they don't have that same struggle, that same mountain to climb, often they don't understand it in others. And so they're just, like you said, do we even have to explain that the guy has to be attractive? Yeah, you do, because most men aren't attractive, and that's what's confusing to them.
There's one other thing that I think goes into this, because what you're talking about obviously is the difference between revealed preference and stated preference. Okay. Right? Yeah. And sometimes guys can hear that sort of explanation that you just gave and think, are women they lack complete insight into their own preferences and behaviors? Like, are they that oblivious? Are they that solipsistic? And absolutely, there's going to be some women who are. Yeah. But I think women are actually more cunning and strategic than sometimes men give them credit for. And I think it might be in their best interests to not say the quiet part out loud. Yeah. Even if it means that to some subset of the male population, it makes them seem like an airhead or makes them seem oblivious. Like, the liabilities associated with saying the quiet part out loud in the feminine calculus might outweigh the perception of being self-aware.
Yeah.
So that's actually rational.
For them to behave like that, not
Yeah.
to say the quiet part loud.
Exactly.
Got it. Yeah.
Yes,
that
I
makes
think
sense.
something we encounter a lot, and I don't know if you encounter this like women, but I feel like a lot of women don't believe like men's self-development is even real.
Yeah.
Or that-
What do you mean?
In
yeah.
the sense that like the idea of a man improving himself is just very foreign to them. Like,
Well,
kind
why
of like
do they ask men to be better and man up? Like,
Yeah.
if they don't believe that that's
But
possible.
when they say be better, what they mean is like take on more of my responsibilities and be more attractive. I literally did this debate. I had this girl on and we were discussing it, and she's like, you can't teach men to be more charismatic. And I'm like, wait, I'm sorry, what?
Of course you can.
Of course, but she's a 21-year-old girl. From her standpoint, male self-development isn't real. It's just a funny, cute thing that we ask some women. Just take experience and ask some women if they believe this. When it comes to money, yes. When it comes to money, yes. Specifically when it comes to physical fitness, yes. But the concept of like teaching men to be better with women, often I talk to women about this and they're just like, they're like, it's just a cute little thing that men in their little groups talk about, but none of it could ever actually work. And of course, because if the status quo stays the same, the pretty girl gets the high status guy. If I was sitting here,
and that's why they even say like when you become attractive, when you weren't attractive, they would have dated you anyway.
yes,
Because you were always like that. In their
consider
mind.
if you're an attractive woman and I come up with some technique to get average looking men to be able to date you, that's threatening, right? That's if that is possible, it's threatening. And so whenever I talk to women about personal self-development, they're just like, no, just be hot, just be 6'4" and come up and talk to me. I don't understand. Like, what do you understand? Like, so the concept, and Rich Cooper says women don't care about your struggles. They just wait at the finish line and fuck the winners.
Yeah, that's true.
And so in that case, if they just wait at the finish line and fuck the winners, they don't
care how he
don't care how he became a winner. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. Women in general do not believe in male self-development. It's not that they don't believe in it, and it's not even that they're offended by it. They just don't perceive it as even being a thing. They just think it's a cute thing that we all talk about, but it doesn't actually affect. Could you imagine someone telling you, like an unattractive woman coming up to you and being like, I'm going to say a couple of words and make you find me attractive? You'd be like, of course not. You can't do that because you're not physically attractive to me. But like when we say that, when we actually take men who are weirdos and cause them to be like, hey, you need to get her to talk about herself more than you talk about yourself, get her to open up, do these kind of things to trigger attraction and explain that to them. And then they do it and it works. From a woman's standpoint, nothing happened. There was like, nothing worked. They would never believe they could be attracted to a guy that they wouldn't have been attracted to a week ago. Do you see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed. I have 1,600 clients, and it's just something that I've noticed where whenever I talk to women, because I let women come on the calls, they're not offended by it. They just don't conceptualize that it's real. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I think there's possibly another thing to complement that,
Yeah.
which is it seems to me that some women have very short timescapes.
Yeah.
Like I remember that
Timescapes?
Yeah, I'll explain. So I went on this first date with a woman that I actually ended up dating long-term in my early 20s. And the date went, in my opinion, fantastically, a lot of good chemistry, touching. And it was right across the street from my college dorm. And I invited her back, said, hey, you want to come back to my place for a nightcap? And she says, oh yeah, no, thank you. And it took many, many, many years later for me to understand the truth of that situation. Because I ended up dating her for 6 years after that. And she told me that her last boyfriend had his own apartment and she couldn't bring herself to go back to a college dorm. That would be a step down for her.
Stuck on her highest setting.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was just baffled by that. It's like, well, I was in that dorm for another 3 months and then I got my own place. And you know, if I play my cards right, my life is only going to get better from here on out. I'm going to have more status, more money, more extrapolated lifestyle. I'm going to understand women better. I'm going to understand myself better. It's like, for better or for worse, men take longer to mature. But women, it seems on some level, lack a long-term vision. That could be part of it, but it could also be the fact that they might be considering a number of more compelling options currently, that it's harder for them to forego what's immediately available. This is true for men as well. To forego what's immediately available for something that might be better long-term, but also is associated with some risk of not transpiring. It's a form of gambling.
Yes.
And that's why I say, I made an episode about this, that one potential strategy for women, especially if they're finding that they're consistently not beating out their intrasexual competition, even at a young age, like they're not the hottest girls, and so they're not attracting all of that male attention, is to find their dark horse. is if you wait until the horse has already won, there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of or thousands of women at the finish line.
Right.
What's the odds that he is going to choose you? It's statistically very, very small. But if you can learn about horses, if you can learn about what makes a horse strong and examine their breeding, you can predict the winner with higher accuracy before the race is run than the average spectator.
Makes
right?
sense,
So she's investing in his future, not just the end.
Well, they always do. It's like one of the most socially acceptable ways to say that women want a rich or high earning man is to say, I want somebody who's ambitious.
Ambitious. That's the word. Yeah.
Ambition is important because it suggests if he's not rich now, he damn well better be soon.
But when he's not rich anymore, we grew apart.
Yeah. Well,
he lost ambition. We grew apart. That's
for better, for worse, I think about women like fitness.
Yeah.
Like you look like you're in great shape, Michael, but how long could you maintain that fitness if you just stopped working out?
It would be bad. Yeah.
Right? It actually goes away pretty fast.
Yes.
If you have a good habit, you can get it back pretty quickly, but you go a month without working out, you'll feel it. Like you never get to stop prioritizing your fitness.
Yeah.
You never get to stop prioritizing attraction in your relationships with women.
You said your prime objective is to become attractive for men.
And to stay attractive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because lots of things will be forgiven and everything will be perceived through a more positive lens when the woman is very attracted. She will change her religion. She will break with her family. She'll move across the world. She'll help you bury the body. Like women who are 10 out of 10 attraction are scary loyal. Like they will do criminal, irrational, crazy things for the men that they love. It's fascinating, but they're loyal as long as their feelings and their attraction are that high. When they dip, good luck with that.
Yes.
The exact same man exhibiting the exact same behavior is going to be he's going to be a narcissist.
So his experience is the same, but her attraction level being high and then it dips. This is probably why we see 78 to 80% of divorces initiated by women, because her experience
and
is
the
changing.
incentives involved in divorce.
Well, okay. Yeah. There's that too.
I think that's the main reason, in my opinion.
Yeah, beautiful. And then the other one I love this was the concept. This is something I had to learn the hard way from my 20s to 30s was the concept of disappointing women. I get a woman, she's very attracted, and then all of a sudden it's like she's asking me to do things that are pulling me away or where I'm disappointing her because, in my case, because I go on different podcasts, I travel a lot, I have a lot of female friends.
Great.
And she'll be like, hey, don't those things disappoint me, or I don't like the fact that you know every single girl whenever we go out somewhere. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's what pays for this studio, pays for our apartment, pays for everything is my business.
It's also part of why you're here.
Exactly.
Because I was doing that when you first met me.
That's another thing. So the concept of disappointing, as you become more attractive and women find you more attractive, you're going to have to get used to disappointing more women.
I talk about this in the sense of feminine consumptive love, that when a woman is very attracted, she wants everything from that guy. She wants all of his time. She wants all of his attention. She wants to go everywhere with him. She wants to be like his little buddy and to be his everything and everything. If she could crawl inside of his head to see all of his true and honest, raw feelings and to think his most secret thoughts. She would prefer that he would be made of glass and she could see every single part of him. Now, let's not pretend that won't destroy her attraction for that guy.
Yeah.
Like nothing is less interesting than a total known entity.
So if she got what she wanted, she'd be less attractive.
She wouldn't get what she wanted.
Yeah.
That's one of the paradoxes. By getting what she wants, like total transparency or complete commitment.
Or a lack of other women showing attention to the man.
Sure.
Yeah.
Then she doesn't get what she wants because it very well might compromise her attraction, which is the primary reason she's in the relationship to begin with. So on some level, men have to disappoint some of the women's desires, not because they are selfish, though I think that selfishness gets a bad rap in relationships, but because it might be best for the long-term health of that relationship. It's like, I can't do this for you because I know from experience and from research and from observation that when this happens, it compromises the stability of the relationship. So the way to disappoint women potentially more gently and responsibly is to side with the relationship. If you make it about, this is what I want, well, this is what I want, then it's rife for conflict. But if you say, hey, I know this is what you want, but I want us. And this is what's good for us. What's good for us is space. What's good for us is that I am maintaining my other relationships, that my whole life doesn't revolve around this romantic attachment.
Yeah.
That's actually what's going to allow us to go the distance.
Yeah. Rolla calls it being the entertainment director on the cruise ship. It's like, I can't be responsible for all the happiness you have all the time. Sometimes pick up a Sudoku puzzle,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we also talk about pre-selection?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, just your overall thoughts on the concept of pre-selection.
Can you define that for me?
So mate choice copying, sexy sons hypothesis, when in two gender species, when the male is surrounded by other females find that male to be more attractive,
women seeing other women around you.
Seeing other women around you.
Sure. So I talk about this in chapter 2 when I give my extended analogy about the sexual marketplace being a dock where captains have their ships and passengers are walking around trying to find passage to various places. It's actually really hard to do due diligence into a man. For better or for worse, a attractive reproductive opportunity is more obvious if you're a woman than if you're a man. I was saying this to Stephen the other day when I appeared on Diary of a CEO, is that it's hard enough to calculate an individual's net worth, even if you were the accountant and you had all of his data. It's certainly not something you can just look at a man and calculate.
Yeah.
And that's just one component that goes into whether this man is going to be a high value reproductive opportunity, right? It takes time to get to know a man. And when a woman is getting to know a man, she's probably not getting to know somebody else. So there's an opportunity cost. And time is very valuable to women for a number of reasons, right? So in general, women don't do a lot of due diligence into men. They let other women do it for them. So one of the best proxies for the attractiveness of a ship down at the dock of the sexual marketplace is the size of the crowd that's already congregated in front of it, because that woman might reasonably assume that at least some of the women in that crowd did do the due diligence and found this ship to be most attractive among the ships currently docked at the pier. And so she's basically delegating the due diligence to the crowd of women who have already congregated around that vessel. Now, this is dangerous because it could be that very few, if any of those women, actually did due diligence. And that crowd, that popularity can be very fatty, subject to faddishness, caprice, very superficial qualities. It can also just be an emergent phenomenon that just tended to arise for God knows why, and it can dissipate just as quickly, especially in the attention economy, right? But that's why pre-selection is important, is because it's a time-saving heuristic for women to delegate due diligence to other women. That's one. Secondly, is we assume that attractive women have their pick of anyone. The fact of the matter is that most men will have sex with most women, but most women will not have sex with most men. If you are women generally get the experience of being with the man they want, whereas men generally have the experience of being with the woman who will have them. Very, very different, right? If you're a very attractive woman, we all basically understand that she could get any man that she wants. And if she's with you, that must mean by proxy that you are better than any other man that she potentially had access to. And she's deciding to very publicly and visibly stand by you, which is a way of suggesting that you are on the top of a dominance hierarchy of hundreds, thousands, millions of men. So an attractive woman is one of the most reliable markers of status that a man can possess.
Yeah.
And that's why, that's one of the biggest things you teach, because it's one of the things that you can control.
Yeah. That's what we teach in the course. The main thing, because it's free. I can't make a guy taller. I can't change his eye color. He can become wealthier, but that requires a lot of help. But you actually can have a ton of female friends that make other women be like, who is that dude? Who is that guy that all these other women are hanging out with? And that's something. So pre-selection is free.
One of the tricks that I've worked with some guys on is one of the best ways to drum up more attraction for more attractive women is to buy an SLR camera.
Yes.
Like a camera is probably it's a great icebreaker
That's awesome.
just in public. It's probably up there with a guitar.
Yes.
But it's more portable.
Or just having a big light on your phone is another one. It's crazy. Women will stop whatever they're doing. We did an experiment.
We see it in the nightclubs because you obviously can't take a camera, but you can put a light on the phone.
Yeah.
That can actually
girls will stop what they're doing and just start performing like it's a play. It's the wildest thing ever.
Kidding.
We ran 2 experiments. One time we had a corner table at Light Nightclub. It doesn't exist anymore. It's in the Mandalay Bay. And we had these big, huge lights that we were allowed to come in and film. And we had these big red Dragon cameras. We didn't even hit record once. We just pointed the lights at the table and girls started leaving their table to come over to ours because they thought it was some kind of reality show.
Wow.
Yeah, the cameras didn't even have batteries in them.
The second thing we did was we threw a party and we took 2 step and repeats. It was during Super Bowl week. So there have been several parties. We took the step and repeats, the red carpets, and we put 2 of them in the house with no cameras. And the girls spent the entire time taking pictures of themselves or having their friends taking pictures of themselves on the red carpets.
Sure.
So just as soon as you turn on the light, the women, this is what you said before about women wanting attention, the amount of performance you see from women is absolutely outrageous. I had Corey Yee come on my show. She's a famous model. And I was asking her, I was like, if a guy came up to you on Rodeo Drive and he said, hey, make a funny TikTok video with me, would you do it? She goes, absolutely. I would stop everything I'm doing to make a funny TikTok video. So attention economy, one thing that I found is that if you can broker attention, women just come in droves. And that's a great way of producing pre-selection.
Sure.
What was your idea with the SLR camera?
Well, I mean, to piggyback on that, women really like opportunities to look good.
Yeah.
And a nice SLR camera that's handled by someone who presumably has photographic experience, that woman will look very good. And an offer to have a permanent record of her beauty and attractiveness is something that few women can pass up.
Yeah.
Now, if you do this enough times, you can start an Instagram channel that's full of pictures of beautiful women.
Yes.
And
it's funny because this is literally what we teach.
Literally
what we teach in the program. Yeah.
I've never done this myself, but it definitely works.
I'll send you some videos of some photo shoots we've thrown. Like 50, 60 girls will show up. It's insanity. And then we have a party afterwards.
So you don't have to be sleeping with any of these women, but the fact is that you are now associated with these attractive faces. It's going to attract attention from both men and women online. Men like to look at pretty female faces. Women want to be one of the pretty female faces. And that's going to make it just, even if it doesn't lead anywhere, it's a very plausible icebreaker because you're basically exchanging something of immediate value for a moment of connection and interaction.
I'll take it one step further. So there's these new AI softwares that can edit photos very, very quickly. And the women still look like the women, but they're edited. Most of the photos you see of women on Instagram now, they're using FaceApp or Facetune to change their face. It just smooths their face out, takes away any shininess. And it'll make them look slightly more symmetrical. I take photos with women and I'll use FaceApp and it's like the lowest setting. And girls will tell me all the time, I love taking pictures with you, Michael. Right now, if you guys message Kindly Myers, Corey Yee, any of them, you say, do you guys like taking pictures with Michael? It's like, yes, because whenever he does it, the photos are edited
and they know we use FaceApp.
And they know I'm
using it.
And they love taking photos. So every time I host a bunch of red carpet charities, they always like want to come and take photos with me because they know I'm not going to produce anything that isn't. And the edits I use are very slight, like the lowest level ones, but it gets away any kind of blemishes and the girls love it. Like and I can make them smile when they're not smiling too. That's the other part that's crazy. And you can also take in their waist. There's these little tricks and it's just nuts. Like girls will come find me to take photos because of this little thing. But again, it goes back to the attention economy.
Absolutely. So that's one way that a man with absolutely no actual optionality with women can create that optionality with probably just a little bit of chutzpah and a few weeks of effort.
Yes.
Have you heard of parallel lives?
No.
Oh, you never? Okay.
What's that?
Okay. Do you know how live streaming works? You can go live stream on Instagram. Have you ever done Instagram live stream?
No, but I've done a live stream before.
Okay. So on Instagram live stream, it'll actually say how many people are watching you.
Okay.
This is an app.
Likes and clicks and comments.
This is an app. Depending on how much you pay the app, will have it show that 25,000 people or 50,000 people are watching you, but they're not. Then fake comments that are AI generated start flying up there.
Kidding.
Guys go into nightclubs and they start doing this with a light on top of their phone. And the girl looks and sees that there's 50,000 people watching and they turn into strippers. It is the wildest thing I've ever. They start groping the guys. They start walking away from their boyfriends. There's hundreds of videos of this.
Well, how long is that going to work until women figure out that there's this app?
It's been a couple years and nobody's figured it out yet.
Really?
I mean, it's pretty nuts. I've never used it.
It's nuts. Like guys are like doing this fake streaming. Like the club gives them a free table.
The club gives them free tables. They will literally comp them tables because they see this. And it's like because we say attention means to women what status means. It's the closest analogy, but I didn't understand how far it went until I went to Dan Bilzerian's parties or the Playboy Mansion. Then I realized, oh, they really will do anything for attention. Some women, not all. This is obviously not a cross section of the entire female population, but some very beautiful women will literally do anything if it gets them more attention. And it's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. But watching the behavior of these women when they saw a guy had 25,000 people watching, you just go look up Parallel Live on Instagram. He makes recordings where he goes to different clubs and does this.
Wow.
And it is one of the wildest things I've ever seen. And you're right. You think that the women would figure it out, but it looks exactly like Instagram.
Well, I believe that it would result in the behavior that you described. Yeah.
It's absolutely. The thing you said before about pre-selection, like say from, just using a scientific term, perfect information and imperfect information. As a man, when I see a woman, I have kind of perfect information as to whether or not I would have sex with her because I can see her physical form, symmetry, hip to waist ratio. Most men, most of the time, will see a woman and make a decision about whether or not he'll have sex with her from a physical appearance and doesn't care who she voted for or whether or not she has a close relationship with her parents. When women look at men, they have imperfect information. They don't know if he's a stalker, terrible in bed, all these other things. And a lot of that imperfect information is whisked away when a beautiful woman is with him. And so that's more of that information. Another woman is doing the due diligence, like you said before. Whereas as a man, a lot of men will go into a relationship without doing, this is the Marine who marries the stripper. Like they'll go into the relationship just from physical appearance alone. And that's enough information for him to go forward. Whereas for women, they need to see another woman.
Unfortunately, I think it's also true that men tend to become more attractive to women when they're in a relationship.
Yes.
But women are generally not more attractive to men when they're in a relationship.
Agreed.
Just go on Instagram when those hotties post one of their pics with their boyfriend.
They lose 10% of their followers.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
It turns guys off.
Yeah.
The inverse happens too. When he posts his girlfriend, more girls want to talk to him and message him and start following him.
The thing is, like in my situation, when I had a girlfriend, all of a sudden these girls who thought I was not attainable saw that someone attained me. And so I was attractive because she was in my life, but I was also attractive because this unattainable player was also attainable. And maybe they missed on this opportunity. I started getting messages from girls like, oh, miss you. And I'm like, I haven't talked to you in 10 years. What do you mean you miss me? We haven't spoken in forever. This is another one I love. Best situation for women is to be about an 8.5, and best situation for men is to make somewhere like mid to high 6 figures, but like not too beautiful or not too much money. Can you go into that?
Well, it's hard to talk about this because people roll their eyes at the problems of the very rich or the very beautiful, but they are real problems. They don't get a lot of sympathy because few people ever have to experience them. But in general, if you are in the mid to high 6 figures as a guy, or you are an 8.5 as a girl, you are definitely attractive enough to have plenty of optionality, but to kind of still fly under the radar with respect to a lot of the traps and ensnarements that are subject to capturing really rich or really beautiful women. And so I think that might be on some level, your best bet of having the happily ever after, if that's what you're looking for.
You can be so rich that you're a target. And the women who come after you, you can't tell the difference because there's so many of them. You can't tell the difference between the good one who wants to marry you and actually genuinely desires you and the one who's faking it. And you can be so attractive that a man keeps saying, oh, he's listening to your feelings and telling you you're right when you're not even right, because you're so attractive that you can't tell the difference. So I like this idea of like not being, so attractive that whole thing happens.
I think it's a big danger that we see. I don't know if you see this with your consultations, but something that we see a lot is that there's a lot of guys who didn't work on like, the riz, the confidence, the game. They never really had experience with women. So they sucked for a long time. Then they became really rich. And then they got this attention from women that they thought was attraction, but now they just became a bigger target than they were before.
I talk about that in the book, about the game of power, which influences all human relationships, is that if you believe that power is really based on being strong or being rich or being high status, then you are very confused. If the stronger, richest, more high status people were always the more powerful, how do politicians get thrown out of office? How do kings get toppled? How do celebrities get ruined? Like, they shouldn't be able to have their fall from grace.
Right.
If somebody was able to precipitate that fall, they were the more powerful party. And they clearly did that with less money, less physical strength, and less status. So those things I call power proxies. And you have to understand that power is the ability to get other people to act in the service of your goals. It's a form of, so power is psychological. I have to be willing to kind of reach inside of you and know what buttons to push to get you to forget your own goals and to move in tune with what I want. That is psychological and it's emotional. And those who don't understand that and who actually succeed in amassing a great deal of wealth or power or status, who don't understand that those things don't protect them from people who actually have real power, which is knowledge on basically how to manipulate other people, they're going to have these enormous targets on their backs because they feel like they're safe because they have the money and the status and the strength. And they think, I'm a really powerful person. Not necessarily. Those things only work to the extent that they instigate certain emotional correlates in other people.
Right.
Like physical strength is only powerful to the extent that it succeeds in intimidating me. If you don't intimidate me, if you can't sufficiently manipulate my fear, then your strength is worthless in the sense of a tactic of intimidation.
It's almost better to look strong than it is to be strong.
It can be. I think it's better to be strong for the individual in question. Like no one ever wishes that they were weaker, right? I guess my point here is that it's not necessary to be big in order to intimidate. Sometimes you can intimidate way more intensely with your words or with what you don't say than with any kind of flexing you might do or anything that you've built up in your stature. So thinking that just being bigger necessarily means that you are powerful or can rely on intimidation. No, intimidation only succeeds as a strategy if it can evoke fear. And if I can control my own fear response, then that strategy is useless against me.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like status only works through the manipulation of awe, which is basically how prestige works. But if I'm not like awed or starstruck by your prestige, it's not prestigious for me, dude. It's not going to work. So that said, somebody who could headline at the local bar on a Tuesday night might be very prestigious for a woman who doesn't follow the NFL. You know what I'm saying? And that local musician might be more high status in her eyes. She might be more awestruck by him than
the alpha is contextual, essentially.
Exactly. Somebody who is a multi-million-dollar Hall of Famer. Who I think would be objectively more prestigious.
Right. And also, like when you think of like mutually assured destruction with like nuclear arsenals, as long as both sides are rational, then they're not going to attack each other. But if you had some irrational actor who was like, I'm not intimidated by the United States, I'm going to go ahead and act anyway, then it doesn't work.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. It's the actual force that would have to work in that place. Yeah. One other thing that I love this statement. If you punish the truth, you're asking to be lied to.
It's so true, though.
Yeah. And this is a really interesting one because I've tried with some of my female friends and women that I've dated before to have like these deep down rational conversations about, and sometimes we're going to talk about the quiet part and we say it out loud. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, I want to bring you into this normal conversation that I would have with my business partners or other men. And when I try to do so, all they're feeling my answer instead of hearing it. And then like what you said before, you're punishing the truth. And so it gets to the point where it's like, I'm not lying, but there's certain parts where I feel like I have to leave out in order for us to be peaceful.
Sure. I think that's part of it. Women don't really want the truth. Like the truth is a hard thing to be, or maybe a better way to say it is they want the truth very selectively. Sometimes I think of women like an elementary school teacher who asks an apparently open-ended question, but there's really one right answer in her mind. And if you give the wrong answer, she's gonna be like, oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. Yeah. It seems like she's open to any kind of response, but there's really one thing that she's fishing for, and that's what gets the credit. That's what gets the reward, right? And if you don't give it, then good luck with that. But think about it the other way around, which is like in a professional context. If somebody were to ask you as a job applicant, well, what makes you interested in our company? And you were to respond, well, I've always been passionate about not starving, and I'd love to get some money, and I'm willing to do whatever you want to do in exchange for those resources every 2 weeks. They're going to think this isn't a good culture fit. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to work out. So there's other ways. Think about inviting a girl back to your house after a good date. maybe you've been fool-headed enough to say, hey, this has been great. You want to go back to my place and fuck?
You said the quiet part out loud. Yeah.
Like even everything was going well. You've kind of like shattered the vibe by being too explicit. So what do you have to say? Would you like to come back to my place for a drink? Maybe a cup of coffee?
And at the same time, she cognitively knows you do want to have sex, but you're not saying it out loud.
But I've also had women, when I've made that offer, say, okay, but we're not going to have sex, right?
Yeah.
And I say, absolutely, not if you don't want to, no pressure.
Yeah.
We're having sex 20 minutes later.
Of course.
Like I had a girl, when I come back to my place for a drink, she said, I don't drink alcohol. I said, I have some lovely tap water at my house, which I'd love to give you a glass of my tap water. She says, I'd love to try your tap water.
Yeah.
She came back and we fucked. So it's like, you can't be too direct with respect to seduction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about this vibe. It's supposed to just sort of happen, which of course also gives women plausible deniability as well.
Right.
I didn't think that this was going to happen. I certainly wasn't looking for this to happen.
I never do this.
Brothers, if you bring her back to your house and you take her clothes off and her bra and panties match, she had already made the decision before the date happened that she was willing to do this, right? So the idea that she wasn't planning or she didn't think this was going to happen is probably not true. Like that can happen, but it doesn't happen in the vast majority.
And you
of
also
cases.
talk about not going halfway. So if she asked you to go to a place that's so far out of the way where it's, you meet me for coffee 40 minutes away from your place, she's letting you know there is no, you said a date is a connection plus the possibility of sex.
Yeah.
If she takes you to a place where there is no possibility of sex,
It's not a date.
then it's not a date.
Yeah, and you're wasting your own time, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful. Awesome. Do you have any other questions?
No, I did want to end off because I watched, a lot of your earlier videos before we did this podcast. Something you talk about is this is more on the mindset than relationships, but becoming your own prophet. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. Yeah, that was on an episode I did on how to become confident if you don't yet have success, which is really important because the basis of authentic confidence is the consistent felt experience of success.
Yeah.
Like you can't fake really deep, authentic confidence. It grows out of your wins. It grows out of your established record. But you got to start somewhere, guys, right?
Yeah.
And how do you feel confident when it's your first at bat? And so I didn't invent this, but I came across this idea called the prophetic future tense, which is a very rarely used verb tense that you find in the Bible. And the idea is we're going to assume that something is so sure of occurring in the future that here in the present, we're actually going to talk about it in the past tense. Which is hard. Let's see if I can come up with an example because it's kind of hard to conceptualize that. Like this conversation went so well that tomorrow everybody went on and subscribed to my channel.
Got it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm so sure of that I'm already talking about it as if it's a historical fact in the past. Now, this is kind of psychotic because clearly it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And there's something a little psychotic about believing in yourself before you have any good reason to.
Sure.
And yet you have to do it.
Yeah.
Because what's the alternative? You're going to be too cognizant of your own lack of success, your own ineptitude, your own incompetence. We all have to start somewhere. That you're going to be a hesitant, bumbling mess, and it's going to make it very difficult to get any kind of string of wins.
And that's why sometimes you even see the opposite where the guy does have the success, but like you said, he doesn't have the confidence wherever that thing is, and he still fucks up.
There are two ways that guys deal with a lack of authentic confidence, especially when it comes to women. The first is less effective, which is they get too in their head. They see the attractive woman and they hesitate. They think, oh, what's the line I should say? Oh, no, it's not a good moment now. Now she's with some friends and, oh, no, that's no good. Well, what if she says this? They start to get too intellectual, which generally means that they're not going to approach. But if somehow they can screw up the courage to do so, they're going to come off as stilted and weird because they're like outside of the flow of time. They've decided that this is how it's going to go. And so they come off as somewhat robotic. Doesn't work. The other way that men can stumble, though sometimes they stumble into victory that way, is to compensate for their lack of authentic confidence by being really overconfident.
Yes.
And they get really handsy. They can get really loud. Really, they're kind of masking their own discomfort at doing this by kind of pushing the discomfort onto the woman, onto the other party. It does work sometimes. It can be off-putting, obviously. It can be loud and obnoxious to women, but it's generally better to err on the side of being too bold as a man than to be too timid.
Yeah. We talk about that bottom third of men having to take risks.
You have to.
This is being
The world will pass
grandiose.
you by.
If you work in sales, it's the same kind of thing. You're assuming a sale that hasn't happened, almost to a level of grandiose.
Assuming the sale.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If it works in sales, it generally works with women.
Yeah. Beautiful.
That's a great way to end it.
Beautiful. The reason you wrote the book, what was, and I know there's a ton of stuff in here. Most of it has nothing to do, or it's different content than what goes on in your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
What was the ethos for you deciding to write it?
Well, I think there's a lot of bullshit that is published in all kinds of different media every day with respect to relationships.
You mean there aren't really 5 love languages?
I don't think so. And I think that we've reified the bullshit.
Yes.
So can I give an example of what I mean by this?
Please.
Okay, so let's talk about this in terms of a professional context first.
Yeah.
So what makes a professional relationship a professional relationship?
So you have to want something from the other person.
Yeah, but I want things from a woman. Is that a professional relationship?
Well, not if she doesn't want to have one with me, right? If there's nothing to exchange.
What makes it a professional
Oh, professional relationship was money?
Yeah, there
we
you
got
go. What the sine qua non, what makes a professional relationship is money changes hands.
Yeah.
If that doesn't happen, you don't have a professional relationship.
Yeah.
If that happens, you have a professional relationship, regardless of everything else that happens.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of the problems that can be solved in the context of a corporate environment could be solved by paying people more, because
Yes.
that's fundamentally why people are there. But if you're too explicit about that, even in a professional context, it comes off as too mercenary and undignified for everybody involved. So instead of that, it's covered in all these ways. They talk about creating an inclusive culture or a fun environment that's conducive to building relationships and personal development, or they have beanbag chairs and table tennis and things like that. And a lot of well-meaning but soft-headed people take that bullshit fluff that's designed to protect the dignity of the individuals involved by making the core transaction a little bit more obscure. They take that too seriously. And they think, oh, okay, I guess culture really is important. So let's make a really good culture here. And they have trouble hiring people because they're not paying enough. If you pay people more, you can dispense with culture. The highest paying jobs, what are those, like medicine? Medicine has a terrible culture. You have to work for like 10 years, 120-hour rotations every week. You don't like it? Too bad, so sad. You work in venture capital. You can't take it, cupcake. That's drop out. There's
work in sales.
There's 100.
Yeah.
There's 1,000 people who would kill for this job. Bring me the results or get the fuck out of here. I'm not paying you for nothing. Like, the better you pay people, the more you can dispense with all of the bullshit. Okay. By the same token, the core of romantic relationships, sexual relationships with men and women, is transactional. It's a transaction of value, broadly defined. But that seems too mercenary. It seems too materialistic, though value isn't always material. It offends people's dignity because it kind of reduces it to a level of prostitution. Let's just be real. Just like being too explicit about the money is undignified because it makes it too mercenary, right? People don't want to feel like they would just do anything for money. That offends their self-respect. By the same token, nobody wants to feel like they're a prostitute unless you're a prostitute, and then you probably don't have as much of a problem with it, right? It offends their dignity. It offends their self-respect. And so to cover this, we invent all of this bullshit fluff that says, no, if you want to have a successful relationship, you got to learn to communicate. You got to learn to cater to people's love languages. You have to go to couples therapy and compromise. And none of that is true. If you give people more of what they want and less of what they don't, you can dispense with all of that other bullshit. And that's why a lot of nice guys will see men who offer more and dispensing with that bullshit as assholes. It's like they're like the venture capital firms. They don't need to do that other stuff because they pay really well. And the women are voting with their
Vaginas.
Feet.
Yeah.
And they're saying that these men who are dispensing with all of this fluff do provide more value. That's why I'm here. It's the cat who decides what milk is good.
He made being attractive the priority. And so because of that, he could dispense with all the other culture
Exactly.
stuff.
So this is my attempt to cut through a lot of the bullshit and also to potentially resolve a lot of, I think, useless arguments that I hear on both sides that keep people stuck.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it's the be-all, end-all truth, but I do think it's a possible way of resolving our differences becoming clear about what actually makes relationships flourish,
Yeah.
so that both men and women can get more of what they want from each other. Because I think on the whole, most people are good faith actors and they want to have relationships. They want to live in harmony.
Yeah.
They want to get along with each other. But people are not telling them what they need to do that.
Yeah.
They're telling them every other thing except the thing they need to do. Just like in the corporate environment, they're saying you need to have movie nights with your employees, pizza parties. That's what people really need. It's like, fuck, just pay them more. If you can, just pay them more.
Yeah.
It doesn't solve all the problems, but it solves a lot of fucking problems.
A lot of problems. All right, guys, if you like what we've been talking about today, also, I love the parts in here about, behavioral economics, the concepts that you have here about dating and the way you bring up like certain thought experiments of like, imagine if you're this person or this person. I think it's absolutely great. The way you explain everything in here is really terrific.
Thanks, man.
So I really appreciate it. And also when you go over subjective versus objective values that people have, I just think it's really great. And I think one of the other great things is you're probably like me. There's a lot of rhetoric in this space that comes off as a little bit hateful. And there's none of that in there. There's absolutely none of that in your content. And there's none of that in your book, which is really great. Because I think there's a lot of people in this space that are looking for a place to go that isn't quite as bombastic as some of the other content creators on YouTube.
Oh, sure. Yeah. My goal is not to enrage men or to alienate women. And any kind of long-term solution in the sexual marketplace needs to be palatable to both sexes, or else it's not sustainable in the long term.
I love it, man.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks for coming out here. Thanks for visiting us in Las Vegas. Anytime you're here, man, just let me know. I can hook you up anywhere you want. Appreciate you, Tristan, hanging out here, man. Thank you to Kyle. The new studio is awesome. We're bringing it all together, guys. We hope you like what you've seen before, and we will see all of you next week.